Reincarnated, he awoke to find himself as a mere insect. A lowly, insignificant worker ant in a vast world. Freshly emerged from his shell, struggling to claw through the heavy earth. All around him, colossal and famished beasts lurked in the shadows, lying in wait to devour him the very second his life began. With no other cards to play, he had to flee for his life, praying he could grow powerful enough to settle the score later. Only moments ago, he was human. This is the chronicle of his transformation into a bug. Upon waking, he scrambled to grasp the chaos of his new reality. The truth was, he had perished. Anthony's final memory was lounging with a novel in his snug home, yet now he was trapped in a void, a boundless, shimmering desert of pure white. If this was the afterlife, where the luxury pools and the endless gourmet buffets. Suddenly, a system alert flashed, announcing his imminent rebirth into a brand new realm. His spiritual mentor for this journey would be none other than Gandalf. The wizard declared Anthony would be reborn in the mystical land of Panera, governed by fate and fortune. He was granted a set of starting attributes that actually seemed promising on paper. Anthony allowed himself to hope he might become an unstoppable hero like those in his favorite games. However, the detailed breakdown revealed his epic skills were just digging, acid shot, grip, and bite. Even more staggering was his species classification, a freshly hatched worker ant. Anthony was paralyzed by the absurdity of returning to life as a common garden pest. With 0 mana, his dreams of sorcery vanished. Gandalf had some explaining to do regarding this bizarre skill set. He possessed a basic bite and a strange acid shot. Where were the legendary, god-tier abilities? The most terrifying realization was his identity as a Formica, a brand new worker drone. Not just any ant, but the bottom of the food chain. He wondered if this was divine karma for some past life transgression. Yet that made no sense. He had lived a quiet life with almost no social footprint. Gazing at his ghost town social media and remembering his crippling shyness, he realized he was truly alone. Gandalf commanded him to step forward and carve out his own destiny. If his destiny was to be a bug, Gandalf could take that destiny and shove it. Bracing for the unknown, the gravelly voice began the final countdown. 3, 2, 1, and the world plunged into darkness. The soul migration was a success, and the biological hatching process immediately took over. Anthony was shoved into a cramped, suffocating position. His body felt alien, vibrating as if compressed by a vice. He had doubted those glowing text boxes, but the reality of his insectoid rebirth was undeniable. It was happening, testing his fragile new form. He counted 6 legs, 2 twitching antennae, and a pair of razor-sharp mandibles. Surveying his segmented body, he realized the irony. The man who once kept ants as pets was now the pet project of the universe. The lighting was abysmal. His surroundings were darker than an abyss, and his new eyes could only produce a murky, blurred image. After scuttling forward, shapes began to form, and past a distant glow, he spotted a glimmer of blue. At least he wasn't colorblind. He decided to master this exoskeleton. Waving his antennae felt peculiar, but they picked up strange scents and shifting breezes. A thick, earthy musk filled his senses, confirming his subterranean prison, yet he wondered where the pheromones and the colony were. He tracked a faint, familiar aroma through the tunnels, hoping to find a friendly swarm under that flickering blue light. Adrenaline surged as he neared the exit, eager to prove his worth and serve the glory of the queen. But as he broke through the tunnel's end, the scene was far from a warm welcome. His supposed kin was in a death spiral, being tossed around like a rag doll. Standing over him was a grotesque predator, bearing jagged fangs with muscles rippling under prehistoric scales. For a tiny creature like Anthony, seeing his only potential ally neutralized was a total waking nightmare. The reptilian horror began its feast, the sound of crunching exoskeleton echoing through the chamber. It didn't swallow the ant whole. It meticulously tore the poor soldier into bloody fragments first. Panic seized Anthony. He was just a bookworm who liked bugs, not a gladiator in a monster pit. Denial was useless. This brutal cycle of predator and prey was his new, terrifying reality. The dying ant pinned beneath the monster's claw-locked eyes with him, a silent, pleading gaze that shattered his fear. What could one solitary insect do against such a beast? Only one desperate thought crossed Anthony's mind. Running was his only salvation. He scrambled as fast as his 6 fresh legs could carry him, fleeing for his very existence. His first desperate sprint in this alien form. He was spectacularly uncoordinated. After a long, frantic dash, he managed to trip over himself and faceplant into the dirt. He likely escaped that predator's lair, But what if another beast was patrolling this tunnel looking for a snack? To survive, he had to ditch human logic and embrace the mindset of a bug. Instinct surged through him, making his mission clear. He had to burrow, and fast. Understanding what ants do was easy, but execution was another story. His legs were uselessly scratching at the packed earth. Then, a memory of his old ant farm clicked. Ants used their powerful jaws to excavate, meaning he literally had to headbutt his way through the soil. Without wasting a heartbeat, he drove his sturdy mandibles into the gritty surface and began grinding the earth. Now, this was real progress. A few seconds of facial excavation proved far superior to several minutes of legwork. Once he reached a safe depth, he hollowed out a cozy circular chamber with enough room to maneuver. He finally had a secret base. Anthony the ant could finally flop onto his back and exhale after a grueling day. He was safe for the moment, but detection by a predator would be a certain death sentence. How on earth did he end up in this nightmare? Not even a day old, and he'd already faced a monster. A hatchling should be in a nursery, cuddled and guarded by its sisters. Recalling the grim fate of his fellow ant in that reptilian den, the outlook for his species seemed catastrophic. He likely wasn't the only one cast into this hellscape, suggesting a full-scale invasion was underway. With a moment to breathe, Anthony recalled the system's cryptic mentions of skill points and biomass. The world Anthony now inhabited was a total enigma. The system's arrival had brought wonders to civilization, yet people forgot the price they paid. Back to his current crisis, he had a single skill point and one biomass credit to spend. He needed to be tactical. If this functioned like an RPG, there had to be a menu. At first, he tried thrusting a leg into the air and bellowing level up at the ceiling. It did absolutely nothing, and he felt like a complete moron. Then a more modern spark of inspiration hit him. Maybe a different gesture would trigger it. He took a leap of faith, swiped the air in front of his face, and commanded at full volume, open status. Success. A thrilling holographic notification shimmered into existence. He had no clue if his numbers were good, but at least he could study them now. Under the Skills tab, he spotted Grip. He guessed this would turn him into a master of sticking to things. The description confirmed it. Grip allowed him to latch onto surfaces with zero slippage. Essentially, he could now defy gravity and walk on walls. Anthony's spirits soared at the discovery. Perhaps Lord Gandalf, the system, was a benevolent deity after all. The man might just be a text box, but he surely had the world's most epic beard. Since he lacked a better name for this holy, guiding voice, Gandalf was officially sticking around. Anthony offered a silent prayer of thanks for the greatest gift of all, the power to summon vital data with just a stray thought. Scanning the skill tree, he knew his next choice was life or death. Should he gamble on acid shot, or would a digging buff be more practical? Gandalf provided the framework, but Anthony had to discover the true potential of these insectoid powers. From his human knowledge, he knew many ants could fire formic acid from their abdomens. He must be a species designed for chemical warfare. It provided a ranged combat option, a way to strike back without getting crushed. Long-distance sniping would be a literal lifesaver. However, looking at the big picture, biting and spitting weren't the most urgent tools for his kit. What Anthony desperately required was intelligence. He was clueless about his location and the other horrors lurking alongside the croca beasts. Lacking vocal cords meant he was on a solo reconnaissance mission through these dark labyrinths. Venturing out alone into a world filled with unspeakable, soul-crushing monstrosities felt like total insanity. Just imagining the various ways an ant could be stepped on or eaten above ground made his exoskeleton crawl. He forced himself to take a deep breath to stave off a breakdown. Survival demanded a cold, rational mind. After a quick pep talk, Anthony locked in his focus. He was his own only ally. He knew the basics. Now, it was time to spend his points. But the million-dollar mystery remained. How exactly did one purchase an upgrade? As if reading his mind, Gandalf chimed in with a prompt to allocate his rewards. He couldn't help but admire the wisdom of this invisible, magnificent guide. He hoped the beard of Gandalf, the Lightbringer, stayed forever magnificent. The buffet of options was overwhelming, making it difficult to find the perfect build. He had to play this like a pro. Increased speed would be his get-out-of-jail-free card. Better tunnel sensing would turn him into a master navigator of the deep earth. Bite and acid were his weapons of war. Meanwhile, biomass offered physical evolutions for his shell, jaws, legs, eyes, antennae, or acid glands. It was no exaggeration to say that, currently, he was the biggest loser in the entire dungeon. Ultimately, he spent his biomass on vision and his skill point on stealth to master the art of the shadow. He needed the ability to ghost through the tunnels unnoticed. The moment he confirmed, his eyes erupted in a searing heat, as if someone had pressed white-hot coals into his head. The agonizing sting made him feel like Gandalf had backstabbed him. Anthony thrashed on the dirt, trying to escape the fire in his vision. Once the torment faded, however, he realized the upgrade was breathtaking. If he were still human, such a physical evolution would have taken centuries. Armed with fresh upgrades to counter the local threats, he emerged from his tunnel with a surge of newfound bravado. It was finally time to launch a true scouting mission. His sight was now remarkably sharp, though he couldn't detect any suspicious scents or tremors from the distance. A fork in the road lay ahead. The right path led to the scene of the massacre, a total dead end, leaving him with only one viable route. He headed left, ready to confront whatever mysteries that corridor held in store. The panicked insect from before was gone. Anthony, the intrepid explorer, had taken the lead. He scurried forward as fast as his legs would allow, maintaining a fairly impressive pace. Anthony let out a mental chuckle, pleased that his journey was unfolding without a single snag. Logically, clinging to the ceiling would maximize his stealth and grip. Now, he just had to rely on his enhanced vision. He could see significantly more detail than before. He even noticed eerie blue veins weaving through the stone walls like glowing roots. With his sharper eyes, he tracked his own physical transformation. His soft, pale newborn shell was beginning to harden as he crawled on. Eventually, he hit the mouth of the tunnel and was met by a dazzling explosion of light. The glow radiated from the blue minerals and the crystal waters of a massive cavern pool, but the predators patrolling the area were absolutely gargantuan. He was so mesmerized by the reservoir that he nearly overlooked the terrifying beast stalking the perimeter. Since he was likely the weakest link in this food chain, being seen meant instant death. Stealth was now his primary tool for survival and gathering intel. And as for his sight, everyone knows how frustrating a blurry world can be. Anthony was still adjusting from human high definition to grainy ant vision. If something wasn't moving, he could barely distinguish it. He had to remember that ants thrive on numbers, millions of tiny sparks creating a fire. A lone ant has weak senses and relies on the swarm, which made his isolation even more pathetic. He was a solo act trying to survive without accidentally stepping on a sleeping dragon with these faulty eyes. Consequently, he vowed to prioritize his visual upgrades until he could spot a twitching roach through 5 meters of solid granite. After a while, Anthony's shell had matured into a deep red armor. As he scouted the cliffs above the pool, he heard gruesome sounds echoing near the walls. He knew he had to get a better vantage point on the source. After a few minutes of intense climbing, he reached the summit and neared the origin of the noise. He scanned the floor with his buffed vision, yet the exact location of the sound remained elusive. It was difficult to focus with those bizarre blue patterns flickering in his periphery and cluttering his sight. Tracing the droplets falling from the stalactites, he found the puddle, but there was no way that those unsettling, gnashing sounds were coming from a bit of water. Anthony pushed his concentration to the limit. There was definitely a hidden player on this stage he hadn't spotted yet. The answer was staring him in the face, but his brain wasn't connecting the dots. Naturally, it was the monsters themselves creating that symphony of terror. Perched safely on the cavern ceiling, he watched a snarling wolf-hybrid beast prowling below. The moment that creature's predatory gaze flicked upward toward him, that he ducked behind a jagged rock, a heart-stopping narrow escape. It was officially time to activate his new trump card. Anthony finally triggered his brand-new stealth ability. His crimson exoskeleton instantly faded into transparency. It was a breathtaking sight to behold. Now, shielded from prying eyes, he could safely investigate the secrets of that mysterious puddle. He got a clear look at the hideous wolf lizard that had nearly sniffed him out moments ago. The next target on his radar was his sworn enemy, the butcher who had decimated his kin. That home-wrecking predator, the villainous croca beast. Regardless of the variety of monsters gathered there, Anthony felt a strange tension. None of these killers were hunting each other. It was as if they'd brokered a secret peace treaty. Anthony half expected to find out he'd walked into a monster diplomacy summit. He realized he wouldn't find answers by playing it safe on the ceiling. He needed to get closer to the heart of the mystery. But he kept a mantra in his head. Slow and steady is the only way to stay alive. Given his size, the descent from the ceiling took ages. If ants could perspire, he'd have sweated enough to create a second lake in this cave. However, his exertion paid off. Using stealth while in motion pushed the skill to level 2. He had traversed a massive distance to reach the center of the action. His hunch about the system was right. Constant use was the key to leveling up. Hiding, and observing was the perfect way to multitask. He could scout the enemy while grinding his stealth experience. Even as his ego began to inflate, he forced himself to snap back to reality. Overconfidence was a one-way ticket to a predator's stomach. If he slipped up, he was lunch. Regaining his composure, He crept toward the next cluster of beasts by the water. Several creatures were intertwined in a chaotic heap, making them nearly impossible to identify. As he crept closer, he was met by a nightmare of blood-red eyes, sapphire pincers, and legs. Hundreds upon hundreds of twitching legs. The sight of the centipede's grotesque, segmented bodies made Anthony's stomach churn with revulsion. He cursed this hellish dungeon for forcing such a foul sight upon him. He would have given anything for a strong sedative right then. Regarding the final resident of this grim cavern, the lizard beast seemed almost normal. Yet, he had to stay wary of those lethal dorsal spikes. He was still the underdog here. But Anthony glimpsed a golden opportunity to transform these terrors into a massive biomass banquet. A world of evolution points was ripe for the taking. To claim them, however, he required a plan, a flawless, airtight strategy. For the next several hours, he clung to the ceiling above the reservoir, shifting positions stealthily to avoid detection. He studied their every twitch, charting exactly where they retreated after their drink. During the first hour, the centipede horrors and the croca beast departed through the same tunnel. By the second, the wolf lizards headed south to a narrow crevice. By the third, the spined lizard finally scaled the wall and vanished into the heights. It appeared he wasn't the only wall crawler in town. He might have called the reptile brother if it wasn't busy devouring anything that moved. That grueling surveillance stint boosted his stealth to level 3. In this dark world, patience is a virtue, and it came just as his aching ant claws needed a desperate break. Once he reached his secret entrance, his sweet, safe haven was only a short burrow away. Anthony yearned to collapse and rest, but he didn't have that luxury. His to-do list was still miles long. First on the agenda, he needed to carve out more breathing room in his bunker, which meant a heavy session of excavation. With his powerful mandibles acting as shovels, he began to chew through the packed earth with newfound fervor. Driven by pure instinct, he cleared away the debris while meticulously reinforcing the walls of the sanctuary. The moment his digging skill hit level 2, the system chimed in to congratulate him on officially settling into his new home. After burrowing like a creature possessed, he finally paused. A familiar hollow ache set in, reminding him of the days his family forgot to stock the fridge. Hunger was an old, unwelcome friend. As his midsection growled, he disciplined himself to wait. After a quick nap, he would venture out to claim his first kill. In any case, he had already locked his sights on that prickly reptilian target. The next day arrived in a blur, and Anthony found himself perched high on the cavern ceiling, hooks dug into the cold stone, driven by a singular, gnawing obsession. He was so famished that the mere sight of the monsters below made his mouth parts water in anticipation. But starvation brought tremors and fatigue. His strength was slowly trickling away with every passing minute. His mind became a slideshow of chocolate, warm bread, pastries, and juicy steaks. All the delicacies of his human life danced mockingly in his head. The deprivation was so severe that his brain began conjuring vivid, edible hallucinations. When a croca beast lumbered by, he could have sworn it was a walking slab of prime rib, nearly tempting him to dive headfirst for a bite. Even the repulsive centipedes were starting to resemble a mountain of delicious noodles served on a platter of gold. Anthony had to solve this food crisis immediately before he did something suicidal, like trying to eat the scenery. He had spent too long calculating his next move. He couldn't allow a growling stomach to derail his grand debut. 2 days, 2 grueling days of exhaustive scouting. He had mapped every crack and crevice of this cavern with surgical precision. 48 hours of insomnia and hunger made focus nearly impossible. He had been hanging over the pool so long he nearly dozed off and plummeted into the depths multiple times. He knew all too well that if he fell, that particular dip in the pool would be his very last. A silver lining to his masochistic scouting was that his stealth had reached level 4. Furthermore, his constant home renovations had pushed his digging skill to level 3. That was the Anthony way. Prepare, adapt, and evolve. That's how the small topple the giants. Yet, hunger was a relentless foe, and he prayed his first hunt would be a success. Suddenly, his antennae twitched violently. He sensed his mark approaching. The pungent, musky scent of the predator began to waft up toward his hiding spot. As Anthony saw the dim light catch the glint of reptilian eyes in the stone corridor, he knew the curtain was rising on his first battle. His chosen prey always utilized the cave wall as a shortcut, descending once a day for a ritualistic drink at the pool. It was a creature of habit, a loner with a predictable routine. In other words, it was a target he could actually kill. Moments later, the spined lizard finally crawled out from its den to hydrate, just as his notes predicted. It was time to see if Anthony's meticulous groundwork would pay off or end in tragedy. Triggering his stealth, he ghosted along the rock face, closing the gap between him and his scaly quarry. He promised his stomach the wait was nearly over. He just needed to reach the optimal strike zone for the plan to succeed. Looking at the razor-sharp spines, he realized a single graze would mean game over for his tiny ant life. But he pushed fear aside. Fear is the mind killer, and his survival depended on cold, hard execution. He had rehearsed this too many times to falter now. The split-second timing of his leap would dictate his fate. The moment the lizard entered the kill zone, Anthony launched his assault without hesitation. Veiled by stealth, he unleashed a precision acid shot from above, the corrosive liquid splashing directly onto the lizard's hind leg. Anthony cheered internally as Phase 1 went perfectly. As his invisibility faded, the lizard hissed in pure agony, its limb melting down to the bone. When the prey finally locked eyes with its tiny tormentor, Phase 2 began. He stood his ground and goaded the beast. He dared it to fight him on the vertical wall, a challenge that, for the lizard, was a descent into a death trap. Regardless, Anthony's superior grip skill had reached level 3. After such intense stalking, neither the sheer walls nor the thrashing lizard posed a threat to him anymore. He held the natural edge of being nimble and feather-light, whereas the beast was clumsy and lumbering. With feet seared by acid, clinging to a vertical surface became an impossible task for the creature. Yet, the dim-witted predator was consumed by a blind fury. It lashed out with its muscular tail, desperate to swat Anthony into the abyss. A violent tail whip shattered the stone wall, but Anthony leaped from his perch just in time to save his skin. The plan was unfolding perfectly. At this rate, he was merely toying with his meal. He launched his next volley of acid, aiming with surgical precision at the lizard's eyes. Another corrosive burn, another round of the beast writhing in agony upon the cave floor. Scuttling rapidly across the ceiling, Anthony repositioned himself in a much safer and more dominant vantage point. The lizard's tormented shrieks reverberated through the entire cavern. That was Anthony's cue to deliver the finishing blow. He couldn't risk other predators swooping in to steal the kill he had meticulously engineered. Weakened by the chemical burns, the lizard's movements grew sluggish. It was time to end its misery. However, before its life force flickered out, the reptile managed to muster one final, desperate tail strike. This maneuver caught Anthony off guard. The sudden, explosive lunge was something he hadn't factored into his calculations. Luckily, he maintained just enough distance to react, panicking as he performed a frantic dodge. As the lizard's final ounce of energy evaporated in that failed strike, the window for a total victory finally swung wide open. Dropping from the cave ceiling, he descended like a nightmare, mandibles spread wide and ready to lock on for the kill. A sickening crunch echoed near the water. Anthony refused to loosen his hold on the rough scales, as the climax of the hunt was now underway. The endgame was a simple war of attrition. He maintained a crushing bite as they both tumbled from the wall, maneuvering the lizard to hit the ground first, so it absorbed the impact while he remained latched on. When the lizard finally went limp and ceased its struggle, he offered a silent apology, such is the brutal law of the wild, and meat is meat. Anthony began drenching the carcass in acid to dissolve its armored hide. During this grim task, his acid shot proficiency climbed to level 2. His growth was accelerating at a breathtaking pace. Inspecting his prize, he saw the poor wretch was still clinging to a sliver of life. It seemed the final step would have to be handled with cold brutality. For both the hunted and the hunter, this meant Anthony would have to feast without mercy. The rigid body of the dying lizard lay broken, blood and fluids soaking the earth as the sound of rhythmic, hollow chewing filled the air. Minutes later, his bite skill reached level 3. It took 10 grueling minutes of labor, but the macabre feast was finally finished. Reinvigorated by the nutrients, Anthony felt like a champion returning from the front lines. He felt like a legendary knight after a duel. A Vici moment. He had literally consumed his foe in victory. Thinking back, he realized he had never exerted himself this much for anything. In his previous life, he had never truly fought for a single goal. Looking at his past existence, he could only recall a profound sense of emptiness and apathy that colored his every day. But now, he had slain a level 2 Spinetail Lacerdos and hit level 2 himself. Thanks to the XP surge, he earned a new skill point. Gandalf was suddenly flooding him with notifications. So this creature is a Spinetail Lacerdos. The name had a distinctly Latin ring to it. This wasn't his first encounter with Latin terms. After all, his own species was classified as a Formica. Remembering his old ant-keeping hobby, he knew Formica was the Latin genus for wood ants. If this world followed biological taxonomy, his human knowledge would be a massive asset. Beyond that revelation, he pinpointed 3 crucial facts about his current existence. First, defeating enemies grants experience points necessary for leveling up. Second, every level gain provides a precious skill point to further his evolution. And third, since the Spinetail was level 2, he could guess it was either born at that rank or had survived long enough to level up once. Most importantly, he remembered his core objective: harvest the remains to facilitate his own growth. As a predator in this ecosystem, he had to consume and evolve, feasting upon the life force of the fallen to survive. Anthony was grateful for the sustenance, but make no mistake, lizard meat tasted absolutely revolting. The flavor was so foul it nearly triggered a violent gag reflex. However, by consuming a new biological source of biomass, he was granted a fresh evolution point. Gandalf's voice was ringing in his head nonstop. Resting in the shadows, his hunger pains were replaced by heavy burps. At least his stomach wouldn't be a problem for the coming week. In addition to the comfort of a full belly, he had secured a bounty of rewards from the system. It was time to retreat to the safety of his burrow and plot his next move. From the high cavern ceiling, Anthony glanced down at the other beasts. They were still entranced by the glowing pool, oblivious to the fact that one of their neighbors was now gone. After a brisk crawl, Anthony finally slipped back into his modest, hidden sanctuary. He rubbed his front legs together like a classic movie villain. It was time to mastermind his next evolution. He started with a quick audit of his status screen, updated after the hunt. While his base stats were steady, his skill proficiency had skyrocketed. He couldn't help but feel a thrill, alone and on a grand, dangerous odyssey, experiencing phenomenal growth. Even when faced with a grim destiny and chaotic, unforeseen hurdles, he would conquer every challenge. He was determined to thrive, no matter how much the deck was stacked against him. But that is quite enough daydreaming for today. He needs to descend from his fantasies and confront the gritty reality of his situation. Giving his head a firm shake, Anthony locked his focus onto the immediate present. He stood at the threshold of another crucial choice, one that demanded extreme caution. With only 2 biomass credits in his pocket, he had to weigh every possible evolution with the precision of a jeweler. His gaze was fixed on a single upgrade, a mutation. For the love of all things holy, he wanted to boost his vision to +2. When Gandalf's voice echoed, asking if he wished to trade his 2 points for the next visual tier, Anthony gave his immediate consent. He truly couldn't grow accustomed to the sensation of his retinas searing for the sake of progress. He loathed that scorching heat with a passion. A few heartbeats later, his eyes were streaming from the agony, but the transformation was finally complete. His current sight was still a far cry from his old human clarity, but it would serve its purpose for now. Next, he had to allocate his final skill point. Fortunately, this was a no-brainer as he had been eyeing one specific perk for ages. That skill was tunnel sense. He had been wandering this nightmare realm for days while remaining largely oblivious to its layout. In a world drowning in lethal mysteries, tunnel sense was a fundamental pillar for his long-term survival. By tapping into this power, he could effectively broaden his operational theater. It would allow him to push deeper into the unknown while ensuring he could always find the thread back to his sanctuary. When Gandalf prompted for a final yes, Anthony agreed with a tiny, satisfied smirk on his face. Acquiring a new skill felt nothing like the torture of physical mutation. He likened it to the soothing feeling of water rinsing through hair. Only the stream was flowing directly into his mind. Shortly after, Gandalf declared that tunnel sense had been successfully integrated into his repertoire. He could only pray that it would prove its worth during his next foray into the dark. Anthony gathered a few stray leaves from the cavern and fashioned a makeshift cot. He deserved a plush, deep slumber before his next hunt. While he drifted in heavy sleep, the rhythmic thud of human boots was drawing nearer. 2 silhouettes, unmistakably human, were navigating the thick woods guided by a solitary lantern. The woman whispered a question to her companion. He assured her the coast was clear. His nerve had just been playing tricks on him lately. Furthermore, regardless of where their path led, any beast foolish enough to cross them would receive a lesson in pain they wouldn't survive to remember. With a stomach no longer screaming for food, Anthony slept in a state of absolute cloud-like euphoria. It was so serene that he briefly wished he could stay in that dreamland for eternity. But his heavenly vision was shattered when he jolted awake with a violent start. He tumbled out of his leaf bed and face-planted onto the unforgiving stone floor below. Reflecting on it, he should have known better. Such beautiful dreams are usually just a setup for a hard landing. Still, it shook off the cobwebs and stopped his pining for a past he couldn't reach. It was time to scout and plot his next assassination. Anthony the Ant wore a cunning grin before diving into his work. There was a new trick he wanted to test out. Crossing his antennae into a heart shape, he mentally bellowed, "Unlock," like some sort of magical girl from an anime. When that failed to produce results, he tried the phrase access profile. He considered using the cinematic Open Sesame, but decided against it. He truly believed one of these commands would trigger the system. Since devouring the lizard, Gandalf had signaled that the Spinetail Lacerdo's data was available, but the specific keyword to open the file was driving him mad. Suddenly, he realized he was likely overcomplicating a simple system. He let go of the ceiling, dropped to the floor, and shouted the lizard's Latin name while sticking a superhero landing. To his shock, it worked. The foundational data of his first kill flickered to life. Gandalf really does come through in the clutch. Spinetail Lacerdo's effectively meant spined lizard. It was equipped with jagged needles dripping with potent venom. After all that mental gymnastics, that meager scrap of info was all he got. It was underwhelming, but Anthony forced himself to stay level-headed. After all, the system had explicitly labeled it a basic summary. Perhaps the system evolved with him. If he hunted and consumed more of the same species, he might unlock a master-level profile with truly strategic data. He pushed that thought aside for the moment. More urgent business called. It was time for the next phase of his mission. The trek back to monitor the reservoir felt effortless as he scurried across the ceiling, singing to himself. A new day, and a new monster was about to find its way onto his menu. At first blush, the scene hadn't changed since his last visit, yet his newly polished +2 eyes picked up a subtle shift. The pool below seemed to shimmer with a more intense, ethereal radiance than before. What perplexed him most was the nature of this water. On his first day, he almost became Crocochow, but despite the sprinting, he never felt a lick of thirst. Days passed, and even after gorging on meat, he never craved a drink. While those titans traveled miles just for a sip, Anthony, an ant monster himself, felt no such urge. He was a creature of this world too, right? So what compelled the others to drink while he felt perfectly fine? Was there a biological chasm between him and them? Driven by these burning questions, Anthony knew his next move was set. He rapidly descended from the safety of the ceiling to probe the secrets of that mysterious water and, hopefully, live to tell the tale. Venturing down, there was a high-stakes gamble, so the smartest play was a series of cautious, calculated movements. Even with those nightmare centipedes nearby, he reminded himself to maintain a steady pace while keeping a predatory eye on the surrounding beasts. Indeed, there was a staggering number of reptilian hybrids in this humid grotto, from the bipedal croca to the spinetail. Every creature shared some lizard-like trait. It seemed this dungeon had a very specific theme. Preoccupied by his thoughts, he failed to notice a wolf lizard creeping toward him with curious aggression. Just as it prepared to strike, the canine beast recoiled in fear, leaving our confused ant friend completely baffled. Glancing back, it appeared the wolf lizard was terrified of a titan centipede. Anthony dodged one predator's gaze, but the monster centipede was a far more serious threat. The entire legion writhed and hissed like repulsive, oversized mutant bugs, their crimson eyes locked onto the solitary ant. Seeing them hesitate, Anthony offered a silent prayer of thanks that his theory held water. You might wonder why a survival-oriented ant would risk standing in the open at the reservoir. There was only one reason: he dared show himself to killers that could squash him in a heartbeat. After days of scouting the locals, he hadn't witnessed a single assault occurring while beasts approached, drank from, or exited the pool. It functioned like a sanctuary. Despite the countless skirmishes he saw while hunting lizards, the monsters strictly settled their blood feuds outside the water's edge. He concluded that something unique about this liquid forced the monsters into a temporary truce, and Anthony was certain it wasn't just simple thirst. His curiosity was becoming irresistible. Even so, he wasn't exactly thrilled about the prospect of tasting the pool water. Stealing his resolve, Anthony squeezed his eyes shut and plunged his face into the reservoir to swallow some of the mysterious fluid. He immediately recoiled, thrashing on the ground as the liquid scorched his tongue like molten lava. The water he gulped down felt like a forest fire in his stomach, as if he had downed a shot of concentrated acid. For some baffling reason, this was the prize countless beasts traveled across vast distances to acquire. Do they truly return every day just to ingest this lethal, agonizing nectar? If so, what is wrong with their brains? Had Anthony been reincarnated into a den of masochistic monstrosities? Still, he couldn't help but feel he was missing the big picture. Aside from the stinging heat, his health bar remained perfectly stable. Given its massive popularity among the monsters, he expected a grand transformation. Yet for him, it did absolutely nothing. No buffs appeared, and the mystery remained unsolved. He decided it was time to move on and investigate the other reaches of the cavern. Before departing, however, he couldn't help but take one more massive swig. This time he strained to gulp down as much as possible, filling his tiny abdomen to its absolute limit. The result was the same searing torture. He rolled across the cavern floor in agony, hacking up the liquid due to the overwhelming pain. After coughing up most of the reservoir water, he decided the stuff was utterly vile. He made a firm mental vow never to touch it again, regardless of the circumstances. Having partially probed the mystery of the spring, he turned his focus to the rest of the cave, eager to map the labyrinth using his new tunnel sense. With his fresh ability, navigation became a breeze. He simply followed the paths where the glowing blue veins pulsed most vibrantly. Suddenly, a faint, unfamiliar aroma caught his attention from the darkness, making him wonder what other life forms lurked in these deep tunnels. While pondering his surroundings and scuttling along, he accidentally stumbled upon a landmark that was jarringly familiar, a man-made structure. Designed to conquer steep vertical heights by breaking the climb into manageable steps. Those were unmistakably stairs. Peering down the flight, Anthony saw the winding blue energy veins continued along this path as well. Thrumming with excitement, he hurried down for a closer look. The steps appeared to be chiseled directly out of the living mountain. Each step even featured intricate, hand-carved engravings. He excitedly wondered what kind of architect could have shaped such solid stone. Humans, of course. This was the first concrete proof he had found that humanoid beings existed in this fantasy world. He couldn't help but speculate about the different races that might call this place home. Anthony imagined himself rescuing noble dwarves from some ancient threat, or perhaps encountering the legendary, ethereal elves renowned for their timeless beauty and grace. Whatever lay ahead, things were certainly becoming more thrilling. Halfway down, he began to wonder why anyone would carve stairs into this specific corridor and ignore the others. To a self-made genius like himself, the explanation was glaringly obvious. This route must be a high-traffic thoroughfare. The effort was spent to make travel more efficient, which suggested more infrastructure was likely nearby. Perhaps this path led directly to the surface, offering a way out of this dangerous, gloomy hole. That thought gave Anthony a surge of bravery. It was time to go all in. As he wound his way down the spiral, he realized the steps were even more helpful than he first imagined. He was annoyed he hadn't thought of it sooner. He could use these stairs as a physical yardstick to measure his own dimensions, assuming that the residents of this world were roughly the same size as humans from his past. He could benchmark his body against the architecture to estimate his true height. After some mental math, Anthony realized he was a bit more compact than he thought. Comparing himself to the height of the steps, he estimated he stood about 1 m tall. But wait, that meant the giant beasts at the pool were actually quite small by human standards. Certainly, to Anthony's current eyes, they were colossal titans capable of crushing any foe. But from an average person's view, they were probably no larger than typical wild animals from the old world. This made Anthony reevaluate the danger of his current neighborhood. Was he just stuck in a low-level tutorial zone for beginners? That thought led to a much darker realization. If these monsters were the weak ones, he dreaded to see what kind of nightmares lived in the deeper levels. With that chilling thought, he decided to postpone his suicide mission. Farewell to the dangerous stairs. But as he reached a new landing, he saw even more signs of life. Torches were mounted on the walls. The further he scuttled, the more evidence of civilization he found. Maybe the sun and sky were closer than he dared hope. He pushed deeper into the dark. As he progressed, the glowing veins on the walls began to fade. While the shadows were perfect for a stealthy ant, he couldn't shake a growing sense of dread. His heart was hammering. It pounded against his exoskeleton as if it were trying to escape a cocktail of conflicting emotions. The prospect of meeting actual people from a new world was intoxicating. His mind raced with questions. What do they look like? What race are they? Can they cast spells? Perhaps there's a guild for dungeon explorers. Maybe he could even talk to them with sign language or a very frantic dance. Anthony's imagination took flight, envisioning a historic breakthrough in interspecies diplomacy. He felt certain. But that a human encountering a sentient soul trapped in a beast's shell was a rare miracle. Perhaps he was a true pioneer. As he pressed deeper into the cavern, the path grew increasingly narrow and remarkably steep. Suddenly, a radiant glow pierced through his murky, blurred vision. Peering upward, he saw a jagged breach in the ceiling, and unless he was dreaming, golden sunlight was pouring through. It was his first glimpse of the sun in this life. He offered a silent apology to the heavens for taking such beauty for granted before. With this discovery, he realized the surface was much closer than he had dared to hope. Turning his head, he spotted additional light sources further ahead, suggesting a greater human presence. Before he could process the thought, Anthony stumbled upon a heavy wooden door left slightly ajar. Based on the rugged craftsmanship, he surmised it was a sentry post, a guardroom tucked away in the heart of the dungeon. Curiously, a rhythmic crimson light was pulsing from the guardroom's window. The light was distinctive, flickering in sync with the sound of hurried, heavy boots. To his shock, they were humans, living, breathing people clad in light armor and wielding strange, illuminating artifacts. Anthony stood frozen, mesmerized by their gear, which seemed designed to sniff out monsters. In these pitch-black depths, such tools were likely essential for survival. While the woman monitored the device, the man began to conjure a shimmering magical aura from his palms. Witnessing it in person felt surreal, but Anthony knew exactly what he was seeing: true sorcery. Authentic magic. He whispered a thanks to Gandalf for placing him in such a mystical world. He was already daydreaming about them, teaching him an incantation or two. While our hero was practically vibrating with excitement over the possibilities, the man suddenly leveled his hand toward Anthony. Wait, wasn't that red crystal a monster detector? That meant he was currently glowing like a beacon on their radar. In his sheer fanboy adoration, he had completely forgotten that he was now one of the monsters. Anthony found himself staring down the barrel of a lethal spell. He was in deep trouble. This wasn't how the first contact was supposed to go. He had made a catastrophic oversight. The only smart move now was to tuck his 6 legs and bolt like a bug. Scramble, Anthony! Move it! He tried to cry out for mercy, but he possessed no voice to plead his case. To make matters worse, he caught a leg on a jagged rock and tumbled mid-escape. Anthony wanted to scream that he was just a harmless little ant, but a ball of concentrated mana fire was already screaming toward him. The blast missed him narrowly, but his joints were throbbing from the frantic retreat. His brain screamed move, but his body was lagging. Pinned and shaking, he watched as more fireballs were summoned. He had to summon every ounce of willpower to dash toward a cluster of stone pillars for cover. Even behind the stone, he wasn't safe. From a different angle, a high-velocity arrow nearly punched a hole through his abdomen. To survive this onslaught, he needed a masterclass distraction, but first he had to find a viable path to safety. He scrambled through a maze of tunnels, using tunnel sense to sniff out a way out. After 3 sharp turns, he hit a corridor reeking of a foul, organic stench. With the humans closing in, he embraced his monster nature and spat 2 globs of acid at his pursuers. However, it barely slowed their advance. It only provoked them into firing another lethal arrow in response. Anthony's survival instincts were sharpening. He ducked just as the whistling shaft zipped over his head. One thing was certain: his dreams of being an ant ambassador had just gone up in literal flames. A barrage of fireballs relentlessly chased the lone ant as if they had heat-seeking sensors. Anthony ran until his vision blurred, eventually slamming into a protruding rock face. But thanks to some divine luck, he survived the impact and dove into a tiny crevice to catch his breath. Replaying the chaos in his head, he cursed himself for being so incredibly naive. He had failed to realize that his human card had been revoked. From now on, he had to remember he was a 3-foot-long nightmare insect in the eyes of everyone else. From the far end of his narrow hideout, menacing, dry hisses began to echo. He had bungled the start, but he needed to lock in and focus immediately. Anthony had to weigh his grim options: face a swarm of angry, hissing centipedes ahead, or the scorching fireballs of the humans behind. As the man poked his head into the tunnel with a murderous glare and a hand full of fire, the decision was effectively made for him. Anthony hit the gas, sprinting for his life as more fireballs began to swirl in the mage's grip, fortunately. But he was quick enough to vanish into the deep shadows before the spell could be unleashed. Guided by tunnel sense, he navigated the cramped veins of the earth, feeling the centipedes swarm nearby. He forged a desperate plan. He would use the giant noodles as a meat shield against the humans. Luckily, his stealth skill allowed him to ghost past those repulsive and lethal centipedes. He figured a well-placed acid shot would be the perfect way to enrage the swarm, but what happened next would be a total coin toss for his life. Escaping the ensuing riot would be a heart-pounding race against the clock, and he wasn't sure he had the speed to win. Disengaging his stealth, he knew there was no turning back. It was time to go big or go home, all or nothing. He aimed his abdomen with care at the throng and unleashed a spray of corrosive acid at the creatures. It was a surgical strike. The splashing liquid coated nearly every segment of the centipede swarm. However, the chemical burn wasn't potent enough to eat through their thick, chitinous plating. That didn't matter. He wasn't actually attempting to secure a kill. His objective was met. The lethal centipedes were enraged, and they immediately gave chase to our frantic ant hero with their myriad of scuttling legs. The life-or-death sprint had officially commenced. After minutes of fleeing for his soul, Anthony wanted to wail at the catastrophic mess he'd invited. Returning to the main tunnel entrance was taking far too long. Curse it, his energy would bottom out before he could finish the bait and switch. Several times along the path, he narrowly escaped being snapped in half as the centipedes lunged with bone-crushing bites. Catching a glimmer of light at the tunnel's exit, Anthony felt a burst of adrenaline. Safety was just on the other side. Like a bug possessed, he shot out of the narrow crevice where the mage stood ready to incinerate his exoskeleton. The man was blindsided by the monstrous infestation as the centipede horde poured out of the hole like a series of nightmare locomotives. Anthony touched down safely amidst the bedlam. His only remaining task was to vanish. But fleeing was a tall order when a vengeful, multi-legged horror was determined to hunt him to the ends of the earth. Running felt futile. He simply curled into a ball, desperately whispering a mental prayer that he wouldn't meet his end today. As if his frantic pleas reached the divine, the lobster-like centipedes began to detonate before they could reach him. You wonder who was vaporizing and hacking through the giants? It was the human squad on the far side of the passage, the ones originally hunting an ant. Anthony kept his head low, avoiding any movement that might invite violence, hoping this chaos was his ticket out. He offered a silent apology as he gingerly navigated the fringe of the war zone. It would have been a flawless getaway if not for a few relentless centipedes tracking him like stubborn, vengeful pests. He was so fixated on the threat behind him that he slammed right into a human's leg ahead in a moment of pure clumsiness. Anthony scrambled backward just before a soldier's jagged spear could pin him to the floor from above. In a twist of fate, the spear thrust meant for him impaled the straggling centipedes that were lunging at his back. Once more, Anthony blessed the Gandalf system for his absurd luck. His life had been saved repeatedly by the uncanny timing of a higher power. He wanted to sing the praises of the bearded wizard, but he was still in the middle of a disaster. Good fortune alone wouldn't stop his two pursuing threats. Enemy 1, the human sentry, and Enemy 2, the centipede beast. After putting some distance between himself and the fray, Anthony managed to trigger his stealth. He scanned for a sanctuary. Where could a bug hide in this madness? He spotted a yawning doorway leading into the unknown and decided that would serve as his temporary refuge. He successfully vanished into the shadows, thanks to his invisibility and light-footed movements. Tucked behind the stone doorframe, he watched the carnage between the humans and the centipedes he had provoked. He felt a twinge of guilt for leading his fellow monsters to the slaughter, but that he had been backed into a corner. It was either fall to human steel and magical explosions, or let his neighbors tangle with the garrison. Meanwhile, in the tranquil city of Lyria, the steadfast Commander Titus was burning the midnight oil in his study. Stress lines etched deeper into his brow, because certain fools refused to leave the dungeon containment to him and his professionals. If the veteran commander had his way, he'd be down in the depths 24/7 instead of being entombed in a dim office doing worthless paperwork by candlelight. Lately, his routine involved repeating instructions to idiots who couldn't tell north from south, rather than getting to swing his prize blade. He nearly cracked his desk in half from sheer annoyance. Realizing he needed to settle his nerves, he stepped out to breathe some mana-dense air. The garrison sentries outside snapped to attention, saluting their superior. Commander Titus ignored the fanfare, marching straight toward the main exit of the hall. Another set of heavy doors swung open, revealing a second group of polished soldiers saluting their legendary leader. Everywhere he went, activity ceased. To the people here, he was practically a deity. The commander didn't stop until he reached a modest wooden portal flanked by two heavily armed guards. Titus demanded a report from Tribunalia, who promptly delivered the facts. 15 minutes ago, a monster approached the post before retreating. The team signaled the centurion on duty before pursuing it. From the perspective of the human sentries, they were hunting a foul ant beast. They were chasing a creature that deserved nothing but the hottest flame and the keenest edge. Titus found the report of a tactical retreat peculiar. He questioned whether the beast had shown aggression or simply fled. He turned abruptly toward the wooden door, causing Officer Aurelia to ask in a panic where he was headed. The commander simply replied that he was joining the fray himself. Titus's curiosity was piqued by the mention of a monster with enough sapience to recognize a threat and run. Beyond the door, the battle raged on as guards fought the centipedes. Mages channeled devastating spells to burn the creatures to ash. No matter how bloodthirsty the centipedes were, they stood no chance against the raw power of concentrated mana. Anthony tried to find a better vantage point, but was pinned by the surrounding chaos, forced to rely entirely on his stealth to remain undetected. It was obvious to anyone watching that the struggle between man and beast was over. It had devolved into a gruesome execution. Anthony felt powerless, too insignificant to influence the outcome. He didn't exactly have long-range mandible beams to turn the tide. In moments of total confusion like this, he turned to the only source he had. He asked Gandalf for guidance. Instead of receiving a sage's counsel, he was met with a stinging slap from a familiar human silhouette. It was his former human self. He expressed gratitude to human Anthony for that vital reality check during such a desperate crisis. Optimistically, this streak of misfortune clarified several lingering mysteries. First, it confirmed magic's existence through human incantations. Second, it proved a human society thrives here. And third, the power gap between his insect form and humanity is a massive, daunting abyss. He also learned a critical survival lesson. Currently, vitality is king. After being pelted by debris and singed by flames, his health had plummeted to a precarious 15 HP, nearly half gone. The silver lining was knowing his limits in a brawl. The heavy price of that knowledge, however, was the urgent need to find a way to mend his battered body. Pondering recovery, he hypothesized his health might slowly regenerate, but the process felt complex, likely requiring specific healing methods to seal his wounds. Regardless, he wouldn't let the golden chance from the chaos he ignited slip away. A scattered buffet of monster remains littered the floor, some even perfectly charred by the fire. He had to lock in his focus now, for a literal mountain of biomass was waiting to be scavenged. Driven by a primal urge, Anthony followed the code of the wild, consumed the mighty to grow stronger, amassing biomass with every passing second. The feast took ages to navigate, but the rewards were immense. By the time he finished, he was so engorged he could barely draw breath or wiggle a leg. Throughout the banquet, he hallucinated a royal gala curated by the system. In his mind, the centipedes were gourmet delicacies prepared with the finest culinary flair. But the fantasy shattered the moment the cold reality of the meat hit his palate and slid down his throat. Without question, these monstrous centipedes tasted absolutely, revoltingly foul. Recalling the sheer volume of rank flesh he had just swallowed, Anthony suffered a violent bout of nausea. Flavors aside, the massive influx of biomass was the only currency that mattered. This royal feast unlocked the entry for Angiosperm's Culipendra. He accessed the profile immediately, only to find it as vague as ever. It merely noted their crushing pincers and toxic tail spikes. Before spending his hard-won evolution points, he decided to audit his current status. His skills and attributes were advancing beautifully. Furthermore, his HP had begun a slow climb back to health, leaving him with 2 biomass points to invest as he pleased. According to the digital lore of the system, all life is supported, but only a united front can reach the ultimate peak, a thought that carried him back to his snug burrow. Anthony finally surrendered to rest after an exhausting day. He sent a silent plea to the great Gandalf, hoping for a significantly more peaceful tomorrow. He had 2 major objectives on the horizon. First, evolving his vision to +3. He was exactly 1 biomass point away from achieving that visual breakthrough. To minimize risk, he calculated that relocating his base was a mandatory step immediately following his upgrade. After a brief recovery, Anthony dove back into his labors. The moment he emerged from his cozy hole, he saw the war between humans and centipedes still burning hot. His hopes for a quiet day evaporated instantly. Nonetheless, the work was calling. Veiled in shadows, Anthony distanced himself from the inferno, navigating the caverns with stealthy grace while wondering what business these troops had in such a hellhole. They seemed hell-bent on purging every monstrous inhabitant they crossed paths with. Upon reaching the shimmering pool, Anthony discovered the area had been transformed into a human military outpost. He stared, captivated by the high-tech gear and glowing crystals hovering over the water surface. Anthony shook off the distraction. This was no time for sightseeing or trading safety for wonder. With each passing hour, the dream of making it out of this cave alive felt more like a fading mirage. It would be delusional to think he could slip past a whole battalion now. Staying put in his nest only invited the risk of being discovered and exterminated. Logically, only one path remained open to him. Yet, without peak upgrades, that choice was a suicide mission. He wouldn't even have a proper insect burial. The only way forward was a terrifying backtrack, returning to the source, the territory of the Croca beast. With a heavy heart, he bid farewell to the burrow that had been his only shelter. He'd shared some good moments in that dark crevice. If he had only had a few ant companions, it might have truly felt like a home. Thinking of kin, he realized this was the opportune moment to hunt for his original birthplace. Reuniting with a colony and living among his own kind would make this bizarre second life much more bearable. Besides, the predator that snatched his egg probably hadn't strayed too far from the main hive. If his memory served, the colony had to be located in one of the 3 tunnels at a starting point. Embracing hope despite the odds, Anthony began his trek. His heart was set on finding the queen and his long-lost siblings. He imagined giving the queen mother a proper greeting as he left the reservoir and followed the glow. Moving at top speed, Anthony noticed the energy veins on the walls were radiating with an unprecedented brilliance. Even stranger, they were thumping with a rapid, frantic pulse. A truly unsettling phenomenon. At the exit of the vein tunnel, he slowed his pace, scouting the open cavern with bated breath to ensure no predators were lying in wait. He exhaled a breath he didn't know he was holding, safe for the moment. To pinpoint the most effective route from this junction, Anthony triggers his cave sense. Mapping this enigmatic realm is his best bet for avoiding the sun-scorched surface and the meddlesome human legions. After several minutes of vigilant scouting, his antennae begin to pick up a faint frequency. Roughly 100 meters from his current location, he detects a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Zeroing in on that anomaly, he focuses the full power of his sensory organs toward the source. He becomes so preoccupied with tracking the invisible trail that he accidentally thumps his head against the stone. The signal stretches onward, but the way forward diverges into two distinct tunnels. It seems Gandalf is forcing his hand, demanding he gamble on one of these two options. After a quick evaluation and a gut check, neither choice feels particularly inviting. Left with no better alternative, he invests all his hoarded biomass into an antennae upgrade to sharpen his accuracy. Mirroring his previous visual evolution, this biological surge brings a searing agony that leaves him thrashing on the dirt. He silently berates the heartless Gandalf for inflicting such torment just for a microscopic edge in survival. With his refined sensors now online, he confirms that one corridor carries a faint but alluring aroma. One passage feels marginally less suicidal than the other, making the decision relatively straightforward. With his mind made up, Anthony commits to his choice and scuttles deeper into the dark. His guiding principle for the day is patience and precision when the war. Halfway through the trek, his antennae snap to attention as a wave of pure elation washes over him. He has just caught the unmistakable drift of pheromones. By secreting these chemical signals, ants lay down navigation lines. This is the breakthrough. After enduring such a grueling, lonely exile, his kin are finally whispering a path back home. However, if he could glimpse the horrors lurking at the end of this trail, his joy would vanish instantly. Sticky web snares are woven across every surface while a predator waits in silence for a wandering meal. Anthony moves with blistering speed, racing along what he believes to be the welcoming scent of his family. He is overflowing with excitement, imagining the colony is calling out to guide a lost brother back to the warmth of the hive. Halfway there, he forces himself to decelerate. He can't afford to get reckless. The memory of his recent blunders is fresh, and his HP is still far from full. He must proceed through this uncharted territory with caution until he locates a truly secure shortcut. As he advances, the tunnel architecture becomes increasingly erratic, twisting and turning in a dizzying maze. While the path grows more turbulent, the tremors in the air intensify. His intuition warns him that a confrontation is imminent. Finally, he hits a bottleneck where the tunnel explodes into a chaotic tangle of intersecting routes. His head spins trying to figure out which lead is safe. Fortunately, his endless trekking through the darkness has paid off. His dungeon sense has hit level 2, significantly boosting his underground navigation. This skill is now his most trusted ally. To complement his natural radar, Anthony decides to implement a rudimentary system of symbols to track his progress. Hopefully, it prevents him from walking in circles. The first move is always the most nerve-wracking, but he settles on the right-hand path with conviction. Sadly, choosing this route proves to be a stroke of bad luck. The corridor is mercifully short, quickly depositing him into a cavernous clearing. There, he spots a pack of lizard-tailed rodents aggressively gnawing on the skeletons of their latest victims. Anthony immediately spins his ant body around and hauls Chiton back to the previous junction. He tries to steady his breathing while analyzing his next move after that first stinging failure. Approaching the mouth of the far-right tunnel, he ponders which symbol best represents instant death. To keep things simple, he crawls onto the ceiling and carves a bold X into the rock, hoping that by following this elimination process, he will eventually stumble upon a more viable, manageable route that doesn't end in a stomach. Venturing into the next corridor, he begins to feel safe, dangerously comfortable, even a sensation that often precedes a fatal mistake. Thankfully, his survival instincts kick in before he gets too complacent. While hugging the cave wall, he catches the glint of a meticulously crafted and expertly camouflaged web. Without his level 2 vision, he would have walked straight into this sticky executioner's trap without noticing a thing. Stumbling blindly into the heart of a predator's lair would have marked the final chapter of his story. Honestly, Anthony is incredibly irritated. Those arrogant spiders likely think they're the lords of the insect kingdom just because they can weave a trap to catch others. From his point of view, those monsters are just lazy scavengers who let a net do the hunting instead of getting off their abdomens and putting in the work. He views the humble, hard-working labor ants as the true embodiment of dignity and honor. If he had a battalion of 200 brothers at his back, he would never have to play hide-and-seek with a spider. No amount of words can accurately describe the sheer contempt he feels for those web-slinging abominations. Resolving to investigate further, Anthony slows to a painstaking crawl. Webs are draped everywhere, yet the weaver remains hidden in the shadows. Just because it's out of sight doesn't mean it isn't close. Gathering intel is the top priority right now. It's the most effective way to map out the best path forward. Once he's clear of that sticky, repulsive zone, he crawls back down to the floor where the snares are more scattered. Using his powerful mandibles, Anthony pries a loose stone from the cavern floor. Building up some momentum, he hurls the pebble at the massive webs, wrecking the intricate trap with a single toss. Realizing that stone throwing is a brilliant way to clear his path, he keeps up the barrage. Anthony snatches up another pebble with his jaws and hones his aim. He's essentially the Shohei Ohtani of rock slinging against spiderwebs. Once he's dismantled enough webbing to open a decent gap, he lunges forward. He knows the weaver of this death trap is likely lurking nearby. By sabotaging the web and letting the stone stick, he'll eventually force the monster to show its hand. Sure enough, the arachnid horror finally reveals its grotesque face. It's likely under the impression that a fresh lunch has just been served. With a single glance, Anthony nearly gags at the sight of such a repulsive creature. The beast has 8 hairy limbs that seem to struggle under the weight of its bloated, swollen abdomen. Compared to the flawless 3-segment anatomy and 6 agile legs of an ant, spiders are nothing more than a biological disaster. The specimen currently blocking his way might not even be a high-tier threat. If this multi-legged demon would just hold still for a second, he could line up a long-range strike, wiggling his rear to lock in the perfect trajectory. Anthony remains perfectly still until the final moment to ensure maximum precision. After accounting for the wind and distance, he unleashes his acid. A foul green liquid splatters all over the fuzzy monster. The impact is instantaneous. Bristles and flesh emit a horrific sizzling sound as they are scorched and dissolved. Following that initial strike, Anthony silently stalks the confused spider. The creature clearly thinks it's hidden in the shadows, but Anthony's tracking prowess is far superior. Once he finds a better vantage point thanks to his invisibility, he fires a second acid blast with total conviction. This time the corrosive hits the mark perfectly. The sizzling intensifies as the spider begins to liquefy while still drawing breath. To twist the knife further, Anthony drops his stealth and deliberately taunts the spider into a chase. This is the only tactic to lure that cowered away from its home field advantage. Despite his bravado, Anthony admits his exoskeleton is rattling at the thought of the spider's looming fury. At least he makes it to the safe zone before it can close the distance. In the absolute worst-case scenario, he'll circle back to the area where the wolf-lizard pack congregates. By doing that, he can trick the spider and the wolves into a mutual massacre while he watches safely from the bleachers. In a perfect world, those mindless hounds would immediately pivot their aggression toward the incoming 8-legged freak the moment he vanishes. If Anthony can ghost through that cave to safety, it would be the ultimate heist. Fortunately, he doesn't have to bank on a plan with so many wild cards. Anthony thinks that if he were a spider, he could build a domain where food literally delivers itself, leaving him to just harvest the easy biomass. He curses the spiders, forgetting to play this brutal dungeon on the easy difficulty setting. His temper is flaring. To settle the score, Anthony decides that Spider needs to be eliminated immediately. A full day has passed since their first scrap. Despite being bitter, he carefully crunches the numbers on his win rate. After thorough analysis, he decides the odds are in his favor. First, the corridor is surprisingly well lit. Even though his vision is only at +2, the brightness allows it to perform well, and tracking the target won't be a struggle. Second, based on rough stat estimates, he and the spider are on level ground as long as he can bypass the web's benefits. With all these factors in play, he could gain some fresh biomass and satisfy his grudge if everything goes according to plan. The only remaining puzzle is how to bait that thing out of its silk fortress. Phase 1 is officially in the books. With those 2 acid strikes yesterday, he likely shaved about 5 HP off that monster's total. The safest strategy for this hunt is to keep pestering the spider, hitting it with hit-and-run ambushes until he wears it down. After all, a single nip from those toxic fangs could be lights out for him, antennae twitching as they point the way. With his eyes wide and his mind locked onto the kill, Anthony begins his move. He cannot afford to make a single blunder. It doesn't take long to reach the web-choked corridor. He probes every centimeter along the path and initially sees no sign of the weaver. Luckily, he happens to stumble upon a cluster of spider eggs tucked away nearby. It's a bit cold-blooded, but these will be the perfect bait to draw that insect out of its den. Recalling his success with pebbles, he starts tossing the eggs onto the webbing, hoping to trick the spider into thinking some high-value prey has been snared. Anthony keeps up the barrage until his nemesis finally crawls into view. After hurls the final egg onto the silk, there was nothing left but to crouch, linger, and watch. He ducked behind a nearby boulder. He maintained a transparent line of sight directly toward the egg cluster. Several hours ticked by with no sign of that coward. Perhaps it had grown too skittish after their previous encounter. To test the waters, he snatched a pebble and beamed it straight at the egg stuck in the mesh. Seeing the old ruse fail, he decided to initiate Phase 2 of the strategy. This stage demanded more finesse than raw power. He gathered tiny, smooth stones from the floor, the kind that wouldn't vibrate or snap the silk like the heavy ones. Instead of throwing them, he delicately balanced them along the webbing, causing almost zero disturbance to the threads. By employing this tactic, he intended to traverse the wall of silk without making a sound. With enough stones laid down, he would be able to infiltrate the inner sanctum without tripping any biological alarm systems. Having paved a sufficient path using this silent method, Anthony cautiously crept deep into the heart of enemy territory. He had never ventured this far into the unknown before. He had to be hypervigilant, as there could be invisible tripwires beneath his feet. A single second of distraction could leave him hopelessly ensnared. That kind of blunder usually ended in a funeral. Only minutes into his supposedly stealthy infiltration, his instinct screamed of a threat lunging from his blind spot. The spider must have been stalking him from the start. The creature was patient enough to ambush him on its own turf, yet foolish enough to approach from behind. Anthony aimed his abdominal opening and unleashed another precise acid blast. It was a devastating, critical hit. Now only one task remained to wrap this up. With a triumphant, mocking cackle, Anthony bolted out of the web-choked zone while shouting stinging insults. He felt absolutely invincible, like he was soaring on a gale through the fjords. A majestic antelope bounding across the open savanna. Anthony got too swept up in his own ego and snagged a stray thread while mid-leap. He tumbled and face-planted into the dirt, cursing his own idiocy. He feared he might perish before ever seeing his colony or a single fellow worker again. Anthony began to sob piteously. He was far too young to meet his maker. He wasn't even a month old. He carried on weeping for a full minute, yet nothing catastrophic happened. As it turned out, that stray thread was incredibly brittle and easy to snap. Spinning around, he found the menacing, oversized spider belly up. Its thorax was still smoking from the acid burn. He had seriously overblown the danger of this arachnid. Devouring the kill provided him with a fresh source of biomass, the poor Aronia. It turned out to be a mere hatchling spider, Anthony the Infant Slayer. The title felt grimly appropriate. He worried that nibbling on such pathetic scraps wouldn't even net him a single point of biomass. He admitted that the fury he took out on the little bug was clearly uncalled for. It had folded after just a few squirts of acid. With no way to heal instantly, its life force had rapidly drained to zero. The experience points gained from the kill were equally meager. What shocked him was earning 2 biomass points just for logging a new species and eating the remains. With a much steadier pulse, he exited the webby zone, clearing sticky hurdles as he went. Now, level 3 vision was finally within his grasp. As his eyesight moved out of the dangerously blind zone, he could finally prioritize enhancing other parts of his anatomy. Perhaps soon he would actually be able to square off against an enemy without relying on cheap tricks. But he was getting ahead of himself. He couldn't survive on delusions and pipe dreams. Anthony needed to gather his wits and find a path to evolve into a fully mature ant. The most direct route was farming more EXP to level up and for that to work. But he needed to establish a reliable hunting ground. As per usual, he slipped deeper into the twisting corridors with stealth active, scouting near the spider's den. He stumbled upon a truly bizarre sight. A colossal pit, plunging straight down into the abyss. It's a safe bet that the deeper you go, the deadlier the residents. If that's the case, perhaps this abyss should stay unexplored for now. Best saved for when he's a bit more buff. In the direst circumstances, this might be the only escape route left. Using his boosted antennae, he tried to project his tunnel sense downward to size up the threat, but it was too vast to scan accurately. If he had a choice, he'd avoid this spooky hole at all costs. This pit could be a dead end, but then again, so was the world above. The certain doom at the hands of the human army was pressing down from above. Anthony was effectively trapped between 2 lethal outcomes. It was a total migraine of a dilemma. Since he'd eventually have to vet all options anyway, he decided to double back and inspect some alternative paths. After skirting the perimeter of the abyss, he found a few branching tunnels nearby. In this dungeon, more paths usually translated to more monsters to deal with. A few more hours of scouting made Anthony begin to doubt his own sanity. He suspected he had just walked in a giant circle, as the tunnel he picked only spit him back out where he started. This time around, he ran into several new species while searching for a viable route. Whenever he reached a fresh territory, he constantly surveyed the wall segments for potential use. After scouting the perimeter and ensuring the spot had solid structural integrity, his mandibles began carving out a temporary bunker for some much-needed rest. With this fresh burrow to retreat into, he would feel a sense of security against the perils of the outside world. Even if it was humble and built in a rush, it far surpassed lingering in the open where predators prowled. This time he avoided digging too deep. He selected a vantage point to establish an observation post with a bird's-eye view of the cavern floor. Constructing this new hideout unexpectedly pushed his digging proficiency to level 4. Anthony felt a surge of self-satisfaction. While this skill offered little in a direct brawl, it was heartening to see progress in his everyday survival abilities. Contemplating his brief tenure in this dungeon, he felt immense pride in his growth. He was still a minor monster, but he had evolved significantly since his first day. His abilities had been tempered in the fires of adversity and sharpened by frequent brushes with death. He had to admit he was still strikingly weak compared to other apex species, but his journey was only in its infancy. Now, to scout this unfamiliar territory and navigate the terrain, he needed a period of stillness to remain at peak efficiency. Anthony had experience with entomology in his past life. He was aware that ants do not experience sleep in the human sense. They enter a state of suspended animation known as torpor, remaining motionless to preserve their vital energy. Despite this, he still cherished the sensation of figuratively closing his eyes, even without eyelids. It was likely a lingering psychological habit from his human years. After a full cycle of rest, Anthony's mind was sharpened and restored to its maximum potential. The moment had arrived to push his expedition further into the void. His objective for the day was to secure one last biomass point for his vision, then begin experimenting with other physical enhancements. In theory, he could upgrade to more powerful legs, a reinforced carapace, sharper mandibles, or deadlier acid glands. Any of these would make hunting safer, and killing provides the XP needed to rise. Bolstering his stats was the most practical way to facilitate his metamorphosis into a mature, formidable ant. His stealth skill had hit level 3. He held on to the hope of leveling it further by shadowing the exotic monsters in this zone. Unfortunately, his first choice of direction led him right back to a marked tunnel. It was a carbon copy of the corridor he had already cleared. He had definitely walked in a circle, inadvertently bringing himself closer to the human military encampment. On the plus side, a mental blueprint of the region was beginning to take shape, distinguishing between the massive arteries and the winding capillary tunnels. Essentially, the wide tunnels served as highways for the biggest terrors, while the narrow ones were alleys for lesser foes. Anthony had burned daylight on a wrong turn. His day was off to a rocky start. Armed with a better grasp of the local geography, he made a more calculated choice. He hoped this path would finally yield the prizes he sought. He was hyper-focused on locating a fresh source of biomass. So focused, in fact, that he failed to notice his tunnel sense had already ascended to level 3. The mental effort of mapping these corridors with such precision must have channeled a wealth of EXP into the skill. It felt eerie to think the system could track his subconscious thoughts near his nest. He identified 2 distinct new monster types lurking in the vicinity. The first was a triple-tailed rodent, each tail tipped with a lethal organic spike. These rats were a bizarre sight to behold. The second was a creature resembling a mollusk, possessing a long, muculent body bristling with vibrant, toxic-looking spikes. He suspected these slimy freaks were definitely venomous. They were at least double his size and capable of scaling the walls. It was wise to give their foul slime trails a wide berth, all while weighing. Which prized to claim for his next meal, Anthony caught the faint, beautiful sound he had been craving. The chaotic snarls of beasts and the screech of grinding claws echoed from a tunnel just ahead. Electrified by the opportunity, he shifted into high gear and darted forward like a shadow in the night. Since he was gifted with this bizarre, game-like reality, he was determined to unravel its internal logic and hidden complexities. He had several burning questions. Specifically, how does the system calculate and distribute EXP upon a monster's death? Is the reward split among all participants, or does the bounty go exclusively to the one who delivers the final blow? From his data so far, He had never seen an EXP alert during a struggle. The notification only ever flashed once the prey drew its last breath. This strongly suggested that EXP is only harvested at the moment of death. By Gandalf's shimmering beard, Anthony despised those centipede zest to his core. They relied on numbers and acted as if they were invincible. However, a quick glance showed the crocobeast was a formidable combatant that wouldn't fall easily. It had already slaughtered a few of those repulsive, leggy horrors. The reptile was doing its best to track and parry every strike. It had the raw power to shred its enemies, but the centipedes were fast and slippery. With a ringside seat to the carnage, Anthony was eager to poach a kill the moment the opportunity presented itself. As soon as he noticed the centipede falter and lose its momentum, the crocobeast prepared to pounce. At that exact moment, Anthony was ready to strike. A mere heartbeat before the reptile could snap the centipede's neck, he spat a stream of potent acid. Inflicting critical damage, the searing pain of the acid paralyzed the centipede, making it an easy target for the lethal jaws of the crocobeast. Like a ravenous hunter, the reptile refused to let go once it had its prey locked in a death grip. Because it attacked with such reckless greed, the croca left itself wide open for a counteroffensive. Clinging to the ceiling, Anthony watched the remaining 3 centipedes fan out to exploit their comrade's sacrifice. The first one struck, coiling around the reptile's torso from the rear, tightening its grip to crush the airway, and end the fight. This might have been a lethal strike if the centipede had tightened its coil instantly. Regrettably, it was swatted aside by the reptile's powerful tail. Realizing the tail is a weapon that must be neutralized, the 2 surviving centipedes attempt to remove it from the equation. They were far too optimistic to think they could cripple the most potent and agile whip in the crocobeast's arsenal. While the multi-legged freaks draw all the fire, Anthony stealthily splashes a stream of acid directly onto the reptile's spine. With the searing acid and the toxins piling up from the long skirmish, the great lizard is moving with increasing sluggishness. Conversely, the acid-scorched centipede has retreated beyond the croca's reach to adopt a more defensive stance. Anthony watches the carnage with a cocky grin. He feels like a grand puppeteer making titan creatures dance to his whim. With a third covert acid shot, he takes aim at the ailing centipede one final time. Normally, Anthony wouldn't dream of acting so deviously, but with the centipede hunt nearing a successful conclusion, but he has the luxury to interfere from a safe distance. He seriously doubts these monsters would overlook such a succulent prize just because of a lone ant. Although the crocobeast is steadily fading from a barrage of gashes and poison, the centipedes remain cautious, hesitant to deliver the killing blow. They retreat whenever the reptile lunges forward. Their target is showing unmistakable signs of total fatigue. It will likely lose its will to fight at any second. Even so, the majestic crocobeast continues its struggle to drag at least one insect into the abyss with it. Breathing heavily, it gathers its fading vitality for one final, desperate pounce. It was a clumsy attempt to claim one last life, but the insects were ready to intercept it. Draining the last of its essence, the croca closes the distance one more time. With murderous intent, it targets the slowest centipede in the pack. Stretching its talons to the absolute limit, it snatches one of those writhing creatures. Unfortunately, the acid on the centipede's back has eaten through its scales and muscle. The agony of the toxin flooding its system is unbearable. That titan no longer possesses the strength to strike. It collapses to the floor, the impact vibrating through the entire cavern. Anthony can feel his heart thumping in his small ant thorax. This is his golden opportunity. Now he just needs to aim flawlessly and deliver the coup de grace with his remaining acid. Seeing the centipedes beginning to swarm the prize, this shot cannot miss. A greedier ant would surely target the crocobeast. Undoubtedly, that kill would yield the most experience. But Anthony is a pragmatist. He targets the slowest, most battered centipede. Doubling the chemical damage on that multi-legged horror, it twists in agony as it slowly drifts into death. Exactly as Anthony foresaw, the other centipedes disregard their dying kin. They're solely focused on gorging themselves on the reptile's remains. With one less mouth to feed, they joyfully butcher the lizard, spraying gore and entrails everywhere. Since no system alert triggered for the crocobeast, this proves only the killing blow earns experience. Fortunately, he managed a clean kill on the level 3 clawed centipede. It provided a wealth of points, boosting him straight to level 3 and granting a skill point. The crocobeast likely contributed 0.80 of the damage to that target, yet Anthony walked away with a full bounty. After happily cataloging his spoils, he notices the remaining centipedes have slithered out of the den to profit from the hard work of others. Anthony's most significant advancement is likely his stealth skill reaching level 5. He couldn't help but glorify the great Lord Gandalf for providing such a lavish reward. His intellect, flowing beard, and majestic brows are truly peerless. Let's shift our gaze and observe the human world on the surface. Alberton, a master of lore for the Abyssal Legion in Lyria, has been analyzing the monster surges following the Great Rending Catastrophe. Today, Scholar Alberton is en route to a high-stakes summit at the Royal Palace. Joined by Commander Titus, they engage in casual banter. It is clear these two share a long history. Alberton is quite prickly today. Visibly irritated at having to attend the gathering, he reviews the day's schedule. A formal mobilization order before the full court is never a routine matter. Commander Titus reveals that the arrangements were made by Alberton's dear aunt. The scholar is not at all thrilled about facing that woman. Commander Titus commends him for maturing into a courageous and principled soldier. Respectfully, he jokingly warns the old veteran to mind his tongue. Titus reminds him to use the appropriate titles. After all, he is still a high-ranking commander. The two share a laugh. They clearly possess a deep, enduring friendship. Upon arriving at the gate where the meeting is to commence, they cross paths with a young man hurrying out. The youth offers his greetings to the two legendary figures, and leads them into the inner hall. As the doors swing open, the mood shifts dramatically. In the chamber bathed in the light of the setting sun, the kingdom's most influential leaders have assembled. At the far end of the hall sits a woman on a glorious throne. Commander Titus of the Abyssal Legion and Scholar Alberton are received with profound solemnity and honor. They march toward the sovereign on the throne with rigid backs and serious expressions. Those already in attendance have varying reactions to their arrival. One striking figure, a legendary beauty, turns and gives them a knowing wink. Commander Titus glances at the stoic Alberton and lets out a sigh. They perform the mandatory rituals for the powerful woman, and she offers the legionaries a gracious smile. Her aura exuded a gentle heat, accompanied by a formal invitation to relax. She was truly delighted to reunite with her nephew after such an age. Alberton had isolated himself in academic research for far too long to escape the stifling grip of courtly existence. Commander Titus was well aware that the Queen convened this assembly partly to drag that stubborn intellectual out of his sanctuary for a much-needed social polishing. Once the chamber was filled, the Queen officially opened the proceedings. She had called together dignitaries from every major province across the realm. Her objective was to deliberate on the recent surge in dungeon volatility and dictate the strategy the kingdom must adopt moving forward. To kick things off, she called upon the most seasoned expert on the matter, none other than Commander Titus. He restated with gravity that the mana density within the subterranean depths was skyrocketing. Based on his division's analysis, the kingdom could face a massive monster eruption spilling onto the first floor in a mere 3 to 4 days. Furthermore, outpost sentries had reported a sighting of a mutant monster ant near the surface, a development that sparked immediate concern. Because of this creature's anomalous nature and the dark omens surrounding its arrival, tensions have peaked and the atmosphere is thick with dread. The Legion is now launching a strategic offensive to penetrate deeper into the abyss. They aim to locate and eradicate the monster ant colony before the situation spirals out of control. To execute this massive military campaign, Commander Titus formally petitioned the Crown for immediate reinforcements to bolster their ranks. They are in desperate need of reinforcements to shield the city from the impending tide. They also need to liberate Legion assets to focus entirely on sieging that insect's lair. Commander Titus delivered his plea with precision and grit, yet he was met with a chilling silence. After a fleeting pause, mockery and disrespectful whispers ridiculing the veteran commander rippled through the hall. Shattering that insolent mood, the stunning noblewoman from earlier stepped into the spotlight to voice her perspective. The Queen was far from amused. Her gaze remained razor-sharp as she granted Corin the platform to speak. With the floor secured, Corin proclaimed that for over a century, the city of Lyria has flourished under the enlightened sovereignty of Queen Verita and her lineage. Every inhabitant of this metropolis has savored a rare era of tranquility, even in the long centuries following the Great Catastrophe. Throughout this peaceful epoch, the oversight of dungeon anomalies was handed over exclusively to the Abyssal Legion. Yet, while dungeon harvesting has become Lyria's economic backbone, many now view the Legion as a greedy entity obsessed with hoarding resources. As is their habit, Commander Titus and his followers are once again pleading for charity to guard the city, proving they are incapable of doing their jobs despite consuming the lion's share of the treasury. The Queen was visibly irritated by Corin's aggressive broadside, so she commanded her to get to the heart of the matter immediately. Corin, acting as the voice of the Mercenary Alliance, once again petitioned the Crown to transfer the rights of direct dungeon administration to her organization. She argued for a more efficient management of current assets and vowed to discipline her contractors better than the Legion. She had already secured the backing of the Merchant Guild Syndicate. The Guild's envoy, a merman of high standing, interjected that by their calculations, privatizing dungeon mining would double the crown's revenue within 2 years. Queen Verita silenced them instantly and rejected Corrin's petition for the umpteenth time. She was deeply offended by Corrin's dismissal of the threat the ant posed, suggesting everyone in attendance revisit their history books. The soil upon which their beloved city stands was once the heart of another thriving empire. As the reigning sovereign, the queen refused to echo the fatal blunders of past rulers who trivialized the dungeon's power. She reminded the court that the dungeon is not a treasure chest or a mineral deposit to be bled dry. It is a predator and must be treated as such. Total vigilance is mandatory. The Abyssal Legion that reclaimed this territory many generations ago. For that reason, the monarchy of Lyria will continue to place its absolute confidence in them. Corrin countered that the future wealth of the land and its people should take precedence over dusty legends. She firmly maintained that the dungeon deserves respect but should never inspire fear. Brushing aside her hollow arguments, Queen Verita enthusiastically endorsed Commander Titus's strategy. She placed the royal guard under his command for the duration of the crisis, declaring that Lyria stands firmly with the Abyssal Legion against the coming nightmare. When questioned if he could truly manage both the monster wave and the ant colony, Titus vowed to the throne that the Abyssal Legion would fulfill its mandate without fail. They have held the line for over 3 millennia. Across the vast continent of Pangera, one absolute truth remains. Beneath the earth, no force can rival the might of his legion. That may have been the case for 3,000 years, but they have never crossed paths with Anthony. Our protagonist is currently busy finishing his harvest by dismantling his catch. Glimpsing the prey's internal anatomy, he nearly retched at how truly repulsive it looked. Nevertheless, he suppressed his revulsion and sat down for tonight's feast. Regardless of how vile the odor, texture, or flavor might be, he couldn't pass up the chance to secure that precious biomass. Those first few mouthfuls were a struggle. He could barely force down the fibrous centipede flesh. This was quite possibly the most offensive thing he had ever tasted. His instincts were screaming at him that starving to death might actually be a more pleasant alternative than enduring another bite of this filth. Thankfully, echoes of past resilience helped him hold his ground. A heap of mangled centipede remains couldn't possibly be worse than the slow agony of starvation, right? Finally, he bullied his stomach into submission. Blocking out the horrific taste, he began to feed with animalistic intensity. He lost himself in the meal until the system finally awarded him the biomass point he had suffered so much to obtain. It appeared that regardless of the beast's size, each kill yielded exactly 1 unit of biomass. Anthony lingered at the site of the kill, curious to see what would become of the inedible fragments. It seemed the leftover organic matter was being reclaimed by the earth itself. If that were true, then this entire labyrinthine cave system must be constantly feeding on monster remains. The actual motive behind this remains just one more puzzle waiting for a solution. The deeper one's knowledge grows, the more questions begin to sprout. Setting the cavern's enigmas aside for the moment, Anthony refocuses on his most critical objective. He currently holds 3 biomass points and 1 skill point to allocate. Since these enhancements are so rare, he treats this like a high-stakes corporate board decision. As for biomass, he is determined to push his vision to level 3. He is in dire need of a sensory software update. His strategy of vetting threats before engaging remains his golden rule, making an optical upgrade mandatory. Without a second thought, he pulls the trigger and sinks all his current biomass into the enhancement. He had tried to brace himself, but nothing could truly prepare him for the agonizing, piercing shock that the visual evolution triggered. Anthony thrashes wildly on the ground. The torment is even more severe than before. He thought the previous level was brutal, but this is pure torture. To describe the sensation, it's as if an entire hive of vengeful bees decided his retinas were a personal insult to their colony. His eyes well up from an itch so profound it's practically legendary. Once the chaos subsides, the prompt to spend his skill point flickers into his mind. Since he's already enduring the peak of physical misery, he mentally confirms the agree button. Now that stealth has reached level 5, a prestigious new branch has opened. It appears elite skills can be morphed into superior versions for an additional point. He'd be insane not to invest in the very ability that has functioned as his ultimate safety net. Evolving stealth into advanced stealth bolsters his passive concealment and drastically heightens his invisibility when he remains motionless. Checking his status screen this time. But he is nearly moved to tears of joy. He has climbed so far already. He feels an electric surge of confidence to dominate these depths and make every predator kneel before his growing might. Perhaps that day will come, but for the time being, staying grounded and humble is the smarter play. Despite his flashy new upgrades, Anthony sticks to his cautious habits, scouting and mapping the terrain inch by painstaking inch. In a head-to-head clash with the wrong beast, he could lose his life without even getting a swing in. Thankfully, advanced stealth grants him the courage to probe unfamiliar corridors. He feels more adventurous about diving deeper into the abyss. He is now hypervigilant as he tracks the chemical scent of pheromones. His curiosity that might finally be rewarded with a glimpse of what lies in the deep. Without his recent buffs, he never would have dared to enter the massive pit he found days ago. Now, he feels a thrill of true discovery. He takes a steadying breath and steels his resolve. Descending into the vertical void without a lantern still makes him jumpy, but it's a fear he can manage. After all, this is an experience no human could ever claim. He must fully exploit the natural gifts of his ant form. With eyes wide, he scrambles down the jagged, vertical rock faces. He expected a journey through pitch-black shadows, and that was true for the initial drop. But once he hits a specific depth, the environment actually begins to shimmer. In fact, that ghostly light grows more vibrant the further down he climbs. He is floored to discover that lush vegetation is actually flourishing within these stone-cold caves. The logic of it escapes him. There is zero sunlight here. He surmises these plants must be tapping into magical mana veins for sustenance. Regardless, this is his first encounter with genuine beauty in this nightmare realm. While he pauses to admire the flora, his antennae catch a vibration that makes them snap to attention. Just like before, he senses a delicate pheromone trail, and once again, hope flares that his family, his tribe, his brothers are close by. He feels a surge of pride for choosing the difficult path, even though it petrified him. He imagines a heroic scout from his colony emerging from the depths to drive away the scavengers who attacked the nest above. Anthony desperately wants to be commended for his grit and bravery in surviving the surface world as a lone hatchling. While drifting toward the scent source, he hits another fork in the path. The tunnel terminates suddenly, splitting in two. He refuses to blindly plunge into the tightest cracks of the underworld. He is still haunted by the spider ambush earlier. There could be elder arachnids, or even worse horrors lurking down here. For now, he'll gamble on a wider corridor that looks less like a trap, just in case he needs to beat a hasty retreat. As he traverses that path, he stumbles upon a sight that leaves him absolutely breathless. It is a surreal wonderland of luminous trees, glowing grass, exotic mushrooms, and vibrant vegetation. He wanders slowly through this glowing woodland, sheltered by the caps of massive, radiant mushrooms. Luminous petals dance with every sway of the bioluminescent grass. It is so unbelievable that Anthony has to ask Gandalf what kind of magic is at play. He never dreamed of finding such a thriving paradise beneath this death trap. How can a subterranean space of this magnitude even exist? He can't even see the far horizon of this field. By his calculations, the cavern ceiling alone towers at least 60 meters above. Once the shock wears off, the dread of what might live here begins to creep in. If this land can support such life, it must be teeming with monsters. Yet, a spark of optimism takes hold of his tiny ant heart. Somewhere within this colossal cavern, his true colony might be hidden. He might need to trek further than ever to locate it. Perhaps the scout he envisioned traversed this very zone while heading toward the caves above. Regardless, exploring this expanse feels like the only logical path. Though given its magnitude, the prospect is somewhat intimidating. The flora is alien and captivating, but it's difficult to appreciate the scenery when he's completely clueless about the local dynamics. In a sprawling ecosystem like this, do the predators grow to gargantuan proportions? How much biomass could a creature hoard in a land so lush and bountiful? Shaking off these fruitless worries, Anthony commands himself to stay sharp and maintain a positive outlook. Following this preliminary reconnaissance, he intends to dominate this bizarre realm and finally reunite with his kin. For the moment, however, he chooses to retreat to the upper levels to farm experience. There are still several local species whose biomass he has yet to sample. He rationalizes this move as tactical brilliance, trying to convince himself he isn't just being a coward. Before diving into the mysterious glowing abyss, it's wiser to master the known territory first. He pledges to level up and unlock more mutations to prepare for the rigors of exploring that enigmatic forest. This shift in perspective refills him with a surge of intense motivation. After ascending from the pit, he returns to the makeshift bunker he has called home for the past few days. Unlike before, he feels the weight of a ticking clock. If his instincts are right, the main artery is surely linked to the cavern the human legion is fortifying. Once they push down here and broaden their perimeter, Anthony can kiss his easy experience and biomass harvesting goodbye. He would be forced to hunt blindly beneath the pit. Weighing the odds, he knows he must strike fast. He needs to shed some caution and make aggressive moves to accelerate his growth. Without more levels and biomass to fortify himself, the descent into the pit would likely result in a swift and messy demise. He triggers his stealth ability and begins a high-stakes hunt, as if every second counts. To maximize his gains, targeting creatures he has never consumed is the most efficient route. This ensures he receives those sweet bonus points from Gandalf. Taking on a massive Kroka beast single-handedly is still out of the question. They are far more terrifying than anything else in this sector. They are the undisputed apex predators. The most achievable target is the translucent slugs. Anthony can't afford to sit hungry while studying their habits, so he decides to roll the dice. Once he corners one, he gets a closer look. The creature is utterly repulsive, twice his length, with a shapeless, messy body topped by jagged dorsal spikes. It leaves a thick, shimmering trail of mucus in its wake. Its skin likely oozes that foul gunk to lubricate its path and boost its speed. Aside from that, Anthony can only speculate. It's time to introduce this thing to a surprise volley of acid. From a high vantage point, he fires a surgical stream of acid directly at the slug's rear. Frustratingly, it has no effect. The beast seems immune to his chemical burn. It simply glides along, totally oblivious to the fact that it's being hunted. It appears the mucus shield coating its body renders the acid inert. If he tried to bite it, his jaws would likely get glued shut. Of all the defenses it could possess, it had to be a slime shield, the absolute perfect counter to his abilities, and incredibly gross to boot. Nevertheless, Anthony still holds a trump card. He possesses the ingenuity and creative problem-solving of a human mind. In fact, the tactic he's considering is a trick used by real-world ants back on Earth. It's the same method he used against the spider webs. After locking a stone in his mandibles, he takes careful aim at his prey. He ghosts behind the slug, masking his presence. This is a breeze given the creature's sluggish pace. Once he's within range, he hurls the stone with all his strength to see if the slimy jerk reacts. Predictably, there's no response. It's a mystery if the slug even knows he exists. Anthony re-engages his stealth and gets to work. He gathers pebbles from every corner and bombards the slug with them. The goal is to let the dirt and grit pile up and soak up the protective mucus. After stacking enough stones to jam its movement and dry out the slime, he pauses to check for a reaction. The slimy horror definitely feels the burn this time as the sound of its melting membrane sizzles through the air. Anthony's strategy worked. He looks a bit like a twisted scientist doing it, but it's undeniably effective and inflicts major damage. The sound and the stench of the slug's scorched flesh make his stomach turn. Just when he thinks this is a guaranteed win, the messy brute whips around to face him. Now Anthony wonders how these slow-moving slimes survive in this barren pit. There are no plants to graze on up here, which means they are hunters too. Locked in and ready for anything, he dashes away before the slug can pin him down. As the acid eats into its flesh, the slug scans the area frantically, let out pained, gurgling moans. When it finally senses a presence, this gentle creature unhinges its jaw to reveal serrated fangs and lets out a predatory roar. From that maw, a long-range projectile is launched straight at Anthony. Fortunately, he is shielded by the boulder he chose for cover. Judging by the impact, it's a high-viscosity sticky acid. Seeing it dissolve the rock instantly, he realizes it's far more potent than his own abdominal spray. He was so fixated on its defense that he never imagined it could weaponize its slime. It's a living nightmare that spits lethal corruption. It's far too late for tears, and honestly, ants lack the tear ducts to shed them anyway. Your only option is to persevere and finish off this gelatinous freak. The catch is that the chemical reserves in your abdomen are running dangerously low. Usually, you can squeeze out about 3 or 4 volleys, but you haven't had the chance to clock the exact recharge rate for your weaponry. If you keep spamming shots now, you'll be shooting blanks when you need them most. Melee combat is out of the question. Your mandibles will be swamped by that gunk in seconds. Acid is your only true equalizer, and it needs to be the final word in this fight. Anthony feels like a discarded pawn, forced by the system into a duel with a creature engineered to be his perfect counter. If he hadn't been so obsessed with grinding, he wouldn't be in this mess. Right now, the smartest move is to transition from the ceiling to the sidewall while masking your trail. This tactical retreat unexpectedly bumps your grip skill to level 4. Considering you spend most of your life defying gravity on walls, it's a wonder it didn't level up sooner. The slug has locked onto your scent and is scaling the rock face. The climax is near, and that irritating mucus layer is already starting to patch itself up. From what he can gather, this predator's MO is to paralyze and dissolve prey with sticky secretions before slowly closing in for a leisurely meal. Anthony still holds the speed advantage, so he decides to deploy a rather cheeky new tactic. First, he stands tall and defiantly aims his posterior directly at the advancing slug. The slimy beast is about to get a faceful from the rear. Anthony performs a provocative wiggle with his oversized abdomen to bait the slug into range. This is exactly what Anthony was waiting for. An open mouth is the ultimate bullseye for a return spray of acid. The direct hit, forcing the slug to swallow his poison, boosts his acid spray skill to level 4. It was a shot so surgical it would earn a nod from Gandalf himself. The slug is foaming at the mouth, clearly agonized by the internal chemical burn. The fallout is instant and brutal. The monster loses its suction on the wall and crashes to the ground, its structure failing, a masterclass in strategy by the miracle ant. As the slug leaks a cocktail of foul fluids from every pore, Anthony maintains a safe distance to ensure the kill is final. He only breathes a sigh of relief when the system confirms the demise of the level 4 coral slug and deposits the EXP. The hunt is over, leaving a 2-meter heap that resembles a giant pile of waste, but the truly stomach-churning part is just beginning. He has to consume the remains for biomass. If his anatomy allowed it, he'd be vomiting. He tries to psych himself up with logic, that reminding himself that humans back on Earth consider snails a delicacy. Biomass is the only currency that matters in this hellhole. At a glance, the gunk still coats the body, but the flow of lubricant stopped the moment the creature expired. To make the meal more manageable, he starts digging up dry earth to absorb the moisture. Shoveling mouthfuls of dirt onto a mound of quivering slime isn't exactly a 5-star appetizer. It feels more like penance. But he endures the grit, eyes fixed on the goal of evolution and survival. Once a patch of the slug is sufficiently dry, Anthony takes the plunge. The texture alone is a nightmare, and that lingering slime sauce doesn't improve the flavor profile. Still, he pushes through without a word of protest, shifting his position to find the least offensive bits to swallow. Halfway through this mandatory banquet, his thorax feels like it's reached its absolute limit. Mercifully, the system acknowledges his efforts and grants the biomass from the coral slug. He leaves the rest for now. Since calories are a luxury, he decides to bury the leftovers to save for a rainy day. Time is a luxury he doesn't have, so he needs to accelerate his growth, which inherently means taking bigger risks. To offset that danger, upgrading his acid gland and primary weapon to +2 seems like the most logical investment. The slug was a massive score, but Anthony still has the drive to prowl the tunnels for more XP. Nearby, he spots a familiar silhouette, a spiny lizard. Seeing a member of the species that started it all fills him with a weird sense of nostalgia. Target acquired. This time, he can recycle the successful elements of his first ever hunt. Utilizing the vertical terrain and his acid should be plenty. Setting elaborate traps would just waste precious time. A direct confrontation using his chemicals and mandibles will be the perfect benchmark for his current combat effectiveness. With his upgraded senses, nothing slips past his perimeter. He easily identifies the lizard hunkered down against a rock for a nap. Anthony is positioned directly above, undetected. He only has juice for 1 or 2 sprays, so precision is paramount. Since the lizard is oblivious, he manages to creep within 5 meters through sheer patience. The slug fight was a desperate gamble. This time, he's stacking the deck in his favor from the start. This unsuspecting spiny lizard has no clue that a miniature air raid is about to ruin its day. Like a precision bomber, Anthony douses the target's head in acid, sending it into a frantic, pained frenzy. It's his most accurate volley to date, hitting the lizard right in the eyes and blinding it instantly. The creature thrashes wildly, trying to scrape the burning liquid off. Anthony keeps his distance to avoid getting caught by a stray tail or quill. His mandibles aren't quite killing tools yet. As a worker ant, they were designed for labor and transport. They look intimidating, but they aren't meant for piercing. The serrations are better for grip than for tearing through thick hide. He thinks of species like the bull ant with their lethal daggers, or the trapjaw ant with mandibles that snap shut with the force of a mousetrap. Hindered by his biological blueprint, Anthony's nips are more like firm clamps than jagged tears. A single chomp doesn't do much damage. However, this is the ideal moment to gauge how many more enhancements he needs. Since he lacks quality, he can compensate for the shortfall with sheer quantity. Mounting the lizard like a jockey, he begins a relentless assault of full power crunches on its throat. The prey thrashing wildly to buck him off, but his grip is far too tenacious to be broken. The more he gnaws, the more agony he inflicts, driving the lizard into a blind panic. After a barrage of frantic nibbles, the lizard finally expires, and his bite proficiency ascends to level 4. His bold play paid off, rewarding him with a substantial progression boost. Anthony feels a surge of pride for toppling the spiny lizard through pure grit and stubbornness. On the surface, Commander Titus is buried under a landslide of paperwork for the myriad logistics required before the grand expedition. Silence has been a rare treasure lately. The Queen's decision to bolster them with royal guards was a shock, but an incredibly beneficial one. His legionaries expected common grunts to fill the ranks, who were useful, but they pale in comparison to the elite caliber and iron discipline of the royal guards. The second they reached the dungeon, the workflow smoothed out and preparations shifted into high gear. Progress truly ignited once the Queen's prestige was on the line. Glancing at his workstation, Titus wonders if he can harvest more stonewood upon his return to the depths. It possesses an exquisite texture, dappled and obsidian. As a youth, he hauled an entire timber slab on his back to the surface to craft this desk. He hasn't found a finer material since. Since he handcrafted this piece himself, Titus built in a clandestine switch to trigger a hidden drawer. Concealed within that void are small flasks filled with a shimmering azure fluid. He lets out a heavy breath and pushes up his sleeve to expose a cryptic mark. At first glance, it appears to be a complex magical matrix branded directly into his flesh. He uncorks a flask and pours the tincture directly onto the center of the sigil. The moment the blue essence hits the mark, it flares and merges. Titus mashes his teeth together, clearly enduring excruciating torment from that mysterious tonic. Having drained the flask, he remains motionless at his desk while riding out the wave of intense agony. After a grueling, stretched-out interval, the pain finally begins to ebb away. He tucks the empty vessel back into its hideaway. He's now depleted half of his medicinal stash. After sealing the compartment, the desk returns to looking like an ordinary piece of furniture. With the fortification complete, it's time to head back to a legionary's true home, the dungeon. He seizes the massive axe that has gathered dust in the office for too long. It's time to hone this veteran blade once more. A professional soldier always ensures his edge is sharp and primed for the fray. Deep within the cavern network, in what the Legion calls the recruit cave, soldiers are herding shackled captives inside. The level 35 fire mage and level 30 archer Anthony saw earlier are whispering. They can't fathom why prisoners are being dragged into this death trap. One truth remains. None of these souls will ever see the sun again. All Mirren the archer knows is that the initiation rite occurs deep within the dungeon's bowels. Veteran legionnaires never utter a syllable about the induction process. The Abyssal Legion boasts a 3,000-year legacy. They are wrapped in enigma, and few know the truth of the private army that once saved the world. It doesn't matter. Mirren is on the cusp of becoming a formal member. The Legion's mysteries will be hers to keep, and she's prepared to defend them with her life. In this recruit cave, Mirren and Donalon the Fire Mage are assigned to monitor the dungeon mercenaries during their hunts. Those amateurs mostly just loiter in high-risk zones and get themselves mangled. They never learn that dungeon beasts are a different breed entirely from surface predators. These arrogant sellswords are a constant headache for the Legion. They overextend just to farm experience, never considering the rescue teams that have to bail them out. They always overplay their hand and never learn. Suddenly, a Legion superior approaches Mirren and Donalon. She asks if they are prepared for the coming march. Mirren replies with discipline that their weaponry and plates have been inspected and burnished. But the officer isn't asking about gear. She's asking if their minds are steeled for the descent. Down here, a leader makes one slip and it's game over. Donalon and Mirren have been selected for advancement. Once they go down, it marks a sacred milestone every legionary treasures. Even so, they must not let fervor cloud their judgment. In a few short hours, they will begin purging the upper zones to establish a forward base in the Great Forest. Returning to Anthony's grind, a frantic day of nonstop hunting and feasting has concluded. As predicted, taking bigger gambles yielded bigger prizes. Necessity forced him to be more bold, and the payoff has been undeniable. Hungry to review his growth and impressive haul, he summons his status screen. After forcing down the brittle spiny lizard and the remaining slimy coral slug, he has amassed 2 more biomass points. With his belly full, he pushed on and stumbled upon another solitary coral slug for a snack. After picking a high spot, he recycled the strategy he used on the first one. The purple coral slug was just as susceptible to his expert taunting. The moment it unhinged its jaw to strike with corrosive spit, Anthony doused the beast with his own searing liquid. Firing directly into the throat guarantees a kill. However, he mistimed his dodge slightly, and was splashed by the acidic while the monster vomited out. Getting doused in that viscous sludge is a nightmare, and those chemical burns just scorch 10 points off your HP. Sections of your dorsal plating and chest have begun to liquefy. Having only recently topped off your health, you're suddenly back in the danger zone. A mere partial hit wiped out a third of your life force. If that spray had been any more direct, you'd be a memory right now. You're tempted to dump everything into reinforced plating to fix your glass cannon build, but there's a massive backlog of high-priority evolutions. After dragging out a grueling war of attrition with extreme care, you finally brought down the purple coral slug. Feasting on the slug stitches your wounds back together, nudging your health bar safely back into the green. Following that repulsive banquet, you feel like you've regained your status as a prime specimen of ant kind. Scanning the upgrade list, several fundamental skills are begging for attention. Still, you can't pass up the chance to buff your primary weapon. Acid Shot is now eligible for a transformation into Improved Acid Shot, a massive quality of life jump that sharpens your aim and extends your reach. With that extra distance, you can rain down devastation from a much safer zip code. This decision is a total no-brainer. It's a double win for your personal safety and your ability to dish out consistent punishment. Craving more skill points, you track down a solitary wolf lizard and open with your classic tactical move, stealth paired with a precision acid shot. After that latest hunting spree, many of your abilities are hovering near level 4. It would be a dream to have enough points to max them all out. Gifting away potential EXP would be a sin. Now for the tricky part, juggling your scarce biomass. If the points allow it, you're looking to push your visual sensors all the way to level 4. Maintaining better eyesight than the local monsters is your ultimate edge for spotting prime, isolated targets. It also offers a certain mental peace. Knowing no predator can creep up on you from the shadows. You can't afford to lose the sensory high ground, or you'll end up as a snack in a Croca Bee surprise ambush. Great vision is a lifesaver, but to accelerate your biomass farming, putting everything into your acid shot ability is the most aggressive play. Once that's settled, you'll have one spare biomass point for your limbs, carapace, or jaws, all of which boost your overall survivability. Investing in your legs will turn you into a speedster, perfect for scouting or quick retreats. Buffing your mandibles feels like a trap right now. They require a mountain of biomass before you see any real combat payoff. Right now, it's a toss-up between +4 to your eyes or a +3 acid gland boost with +1 to speed. Your survival instincts push you toward the defensive route as you prep for new surroundings. Stacking every possible advantage is the only way to stay alive in this hole. After weighing his options, Anthony finally bites the bullet and buys the eye upgrade for 4 biomass points, predictably. But his retinas were hit by a wave of soul-crushing agony. He thrashes on the cavern floor, fighting the urge to rip his own face off. His eyes are physically swelling and reconfiguring within his skull. His exoskeleton is cracking and shifting to accommodate the new optics. Anthony begs Gandalf to end the torment. Evolutions are a blessing, but the actual process feels like it was designed by a sadist. After what felt like a literal age, the searing heat finally faded. His visual clarity has undergone a massive leap in quality. His field of view has widened significantly, catching movement he would have missed before. It's not flawless yet, but the current Anthony is a world away from the bewildered little ant who first woke up in Pangera. He has a gut feeling that his reunion with the colony is just around the corner. For now, the grind continues. Harvest as much XP and biomass as humanly, or antly, possible. That means seeking out fresh targets to cash in on those sweet new species biomass bonuses. Feeling fully recharged, he thinks it's time to take on one of those blade-tail rats. The tricky part is catching one of those rodents away from the pack. Heading toward the main corridor, his antennae pick up faint tremors from a scuffle up ahead. If it's a monster brawl, he might be able to swoop in for some easy points. With a fresh spark of hope, he scurries toward the sound of the chaos. Just a few days after the Crocus Centipede showdown, Anthony stumbles upon a fresh skirmish. 4 familiar multi-legged freaks versus 3 wolves. The fight is a bloody mess. Despite being outnumbered, the wolves are making up for it with sheer, unbridled savagery. Neither group realizes an invisible young ant is clinging to the ceiling, waiting for the perfect moment to drop a chemical payload. First, he repositioned himself to find a cleaner line of fire. This is the moment to put his upgraded hardware to the test. After a tense stalemate, the two sides pull back, panting and sizing each other up for the next round. One twitch, and the carnage will restart. The sheer hatred radiating from both sides is palpable. Yet, both groups are playing it safe, waiting for a slip-up. It takes Anthony to light the fuse. He chooses the centipedes as his first targets for a dose of acid. He has a personal vendetta against these creepy crawlies. It only feels right to set their backs on fire. Almost instantly, the wolf pack pounces on the opening created by his shot, one of the hounds. Dot locks onto the singed centipede that's thrashing in pain, having been isolated from its squad. The wolf ignores the centipede's desperate clicking and lunges like a creature possessed. The centipede fires its own counterspray of acid, desperate to keep the predator at bay. Neither combatant is giving the other an inch to breathe. The centipede attempts to close the distance with a stealthy strike, but is thoroughly parried by the beast's spiked tail, observing from the ultimate vantage point. Anthony is absolutely floored by the sheer savagery of this clash. He envisions himself down there squaring off against the hounds. If he caught a blow from that tail, he'd surely be flattened like a pancake. It is a terrifying thought, but the reality is even more grim. The centipede, crippled and bleeding, could not withstand the hound's relentless onslaught. Eventually, it was pinned to the earth, never to scuttle again. The wolf's muzzle is masked in arrogance, as if thinking a mere insect should never dare challenge the majesty of the canine kind. But before it could utilize its tail for the final execution, a sudden twist occurred. Anthony unleashes a deluge of acid onto the hound, dissolving its fur and searing through its hide. He wears a devious grin while remaining perfectly camouflaged thanks to his stealth mastery. Ruining a wolf's moment of triumph isn't honorable, but survival demands pragmatism. Of course, a solitary acid volley isn't sufficient to bring down a massive and potent predator like the hound. The same applies to the centipedes. The war between these two formidable species has hit a stalemate. With one centipede eliminated, the contest has become remarkably balanced. The bugs seem hesitant after losing their numerical edge. But the hounds are emboldened, surging forward as the momentum of the kill swings in their favor. To check the hound's ego, Anthony launches a chemical strike at the alpha. His long-range artillery upgrade is on full display. The impact sends the lead hound tumbling to the dirt, thrashing and howling in sheer agony. Spotting the incapacitated dog, the centipedes swarm forward to capitalize on the opening. They use their jagged pincers to grip and anchor the beast, halting its movement and neutralizing its lethal fangs. The multi-legged horrors wrap their elongated bodies around their snarling foe to constrict and crush it. No matter how violently the hound recoils, the claws pinning it down continue to shred through its flesh. And relentless stings inject a lethal cocktail of venom deep into its bloodstream. While the opportunity remains, Anthony decides to descend from the ceiling and creep toward the edge. One hound is being strangled and poisoned to death, but the other dogs have vanished. Not for a single heartbeat does the carnage subside. While all focus is directed at executing the enemy, Anthony boldly approaches the nearly dead centipede. With just a few snaps of his jaws, this one will be history. He demonstrates the lethal force of his level 4 mandibles, piercing the exoskeleton in a single crunch and causing fluid to erupt. The killing blow yields more EXP, and he is free to drag the bounty into the shadows. The conflict he orchestrated is reaching a bloody climax. Those insects are pouring all their remaining energy into slaying the third hound. The surviving centipedes are fighting tooth and nail for survival, lashing their toxic spikes to repel the other hounds. Even when drained by venom, the impact of a hound's spiked tail is a force that should never be underestimated. It swats the persistent bugs away, sending them colliding into the cavern walls, dazed and crippled. Many of their limbs and joints were pulverized on impact. Both factions are severely wounded, with their combat effectiveness nearly spent. Now, they simply circle one another, hunting for a final weakness to exploit. As if an invisible signal flared, the two monsters lunge together, locking in a desperate, tangled embrace. Anthony watches silently from the wings. This spectacle is like a miniature kaiju war. By the conclusion of the brawl, neither the centipedes nor the hounds have the stamina to continue. They collapse onto the cavern floor simultaneously. Both predators slump down, completely drained and slipping into unconsciousness. Anthony strolls casually across the blood-soaked battlefield. After an all-out struggle, these creatures are on the brink of death, utterly unable to defend themselves. That is tragic news for them, but it's like a holiday windfall for our ant protagonist. He applauds himself for making superior monsters dance to his tune. He feels like a brilliant maestro directing a symphony of chaos. All these helpless targets with only a sliver of life remaining are essentially an untapped goldmine of EXP and biomass. The young Lupus Draco range from level 3 to 4. As he executes the level 2 and 3 clawed centipedes, each one grants Anthony varying amounts of EXP, but the total surpasses any previous haul. His experience bar skyrockets, hitting the ceiling and opening the evolution menu. The system chime rings like a heavenly melody in his ears. Anthony sinks to his legs and offers a prayer to Gandalf. After delivering the finishing strikes, it is time to feast on the fresh kill. He nibbles just enough from each body to extract the nutrient-rich biomass. He hears a noise, a rhythm growing louder. He must feed like a glutton to maximize his gains. He has a sinking feeling that the source of that sound is heading straight for his position. Biting into the meat of a young Lupus Draco, a new species yet to be logged in his profile, grants him a biomass bonus. When fully grown, they transform into the dreaded dragon wolves. Anthony wishes he could linger for another hour or even 10 minutes, but the rhythmic thud of marching boots is getting closer by the second. He wants to take some provisions to go, but he has already gorged himself on an amount of meat equal to a whole dragon wolf, and his midsection is ready to pop. In that moment, he remembers a fascinating detail from his research on ants back on Earth. You see, many ant species are equipped with two distinct stomachs. Scouts and laborers don't always haul the physical carcass back to the mound. Often, they consume the liquid nutrients and fill what is known as their social stomach. Upon returning to the colony, they regurgitate the stored food to share with their sisters. It might sound a little repulsive, but the efficiency is undeniable. Certain worker ants transform into living larders, bloating to preposterous proportions just to sustain the entire colony. If Anthony's personal belly is already packed to the brim, it's high time he utilized his social stomach. Disregarding the thundering footsteps, he plunges into a second helping of the feast to hoard more biomass. The remains and hounds are picked clean. Their gristle and organs are pulverized by his powerful mandibles. Lost in the euphoria of the banquet, Anthony is jolted back to reality by the sight of dancing lights closing in. He bolts instantly. All his hard-earned progress will vanish if those humans lay their hands on him. The sheer volume of meat in both bellies weighs him down, turning his escape into a sluggish crawl. Reaching the rock face, he strains every limb to the breaking point, clawing upward even as the climb becomes agonizingly difficult. He doesn't dare steal a glance back, but he hears the soldiers butchering the fallen beasts. His sanctuary is a mere 10 m away. He has to reach it. Humans begin to swarm the shadows directly beneath his precarious perch. Their intrusion goads hidden monsters into a desperate stand. Yet no matter how the clawed centipedes or dragon wolves rule this realm, they are no match for human precision. Enchanted steel and arrows far outclass raw, chaotic savagery. Anthony remains shrouded and tries to haul his heavy backside up the wall. The cavern echoes with the rhythm of incantations, the hiss of arrows, and the lethal song of swinging blades. It isn't a battle, it's a one-sided massacre. Miraculously, Anthony slips into his tunnel without being spotted by a single soul. Since the main entrance is a death trap, he's forced to utilize his secret dirt wall exit. He had carved this escape route earlier, but now his posterior is far too plump. His rear is simply too massive to squeeze through the gap. Anthony struggles desperately to wriggle free, but he's wedged tighter than a cork in a bottle. Exerting every ounce of his strength, he finally pops through the narrow hole and face plants onto the floor. Now it's time to invest his biomass and drag his weary form down into the depths of the pit. Trading 4 biomass, he upgrades his acid gland to +3 and reinforces his legs to +1. Much like the vision enhancement, the acid gland upgrade feels like a searing case of internal fire in his rear. It's agonizing, but he cannot stop. Plummeting to his doom after finally reaching the pit is not an option he's willing to entertain. With his new bulk, every stride requires a rock-solid foundation. Hopefully, these reinforced legs can carry the extra weight. The descent into the abyss is treacherous. He faces several life flashes before your eyes moments as his grip falters on the cliffside. Halfway down the shaft, a colossal detonation rocks the dungeon, raining debris and dust into the dark void. The humans must have blasted through a nearby wall. They've bypassed his nest and are closing in on this very pit. Driven by sheer panic, Anthony abandons all caution and scrambles downward at a breakneck pace. Lingering near the blasts is a death sentence. The humans will surely descend, leaving him time for only one vital task. Against the odds, he hits the bottom without a scratch. It was a soul-crushing ordeal, but he survived. He summons the system interface and navigates to the evolution menu. Amidst the system's praise, he's given a crossroads. Mature into an adult worker ant of the Formica line, or begin the path of condensing a monster core. The adult worker path offers steady stat growth and linear skills. Conversely, the monster core unlocks MP and the potential for custom evolution. While the adult worker form offers immediate safety, the monster core is a golden ticket to the world of magic. He is utterly captivated by the latter. Without a second thought, he gambles on the riskier, more magical path. Anthony drifts into unconsciousness for an eternity before finally forcing his heavy eyelids open. The first sensation to greet him is a pulsating sphere of intense heat radiating from within his chest. That, he realizes, is his brand new, flickering monster core. He staggers to his feet, weak from the evolutionary strain. He must vanish before the humans lower their scouts into the abyss. While retreating into the shadows, he pulls up his status window to survey the damage and the gains. His level has bottomed out, and his core statistics have been severely diminished. He curses the heavens for resetting his hard-earned progress all the way back to level 1. Every drop of sweat spent hunting and every bit of experience gained has seemingly evaporated. The incredible luck and the daring opportunities he seized have been wiped from the record. Getting this far was a nightmare. This total reset feels like a cruel joke. But as his temper cools, he spots a silver lining. The MP menu is active, sitting at a fresh 10 points. His instinct was correct. The monster core is the essential catalyst for creatures of his kind to command magic. It explains the obsession other monsters had with the mana-rich pool. It was a sacred, neutral ground for a reason. By drinking that essence, they could feast on mana and jumpstart the birth of their own monster cores. Even though he took the fast track to power, his stats were gutted just for 10 MP. He can't even produce a spark yet. To make matters worse, he is now forced to traverse even more treacherous and lethal territory. Those forfeited statistics would have undoubtedly been his lifeline for staying alive. He attempts to channel his MP to stir a few stray leaves, but they remain motionless. If he chose poorly, he's at a total loss. Yet the allure of wielding magic and mana is simply too intoxicating. He must embrace the consequences of his gamble. Perhaps this evolution will empower him to confront horrors he once could only flee from in terror. Since he is technically unevolved again, it means he can harvest levels and skill points at a lightning-fast pace. He avoids glancing at the skill tree to prevent mana, shaping, or chant from tempting him. He must maintain his resolve. Now, the time has come to scout the gargantuan and enigmatic depths of the subterranean floor. At a cursory glance, the jagged ceiling of the cavern appears to loom a staggering 60 to 70 meters overhead. In his current state, he flatly refuses to scale such a height. A single lapse in grip would result in a fatal plummet. Furthermore, despite his +4 enhancement, his vision still fails to pierce the gloom to find the end of the walls. Being an insect, he lacks the standard eyes of a human, relying instead on complex compound eyes. This architectural difference means his sight doesn't function with a single, concentrated focal point. Unlike humans, who possess the ability to scrutinize a specific dot with vivid, sharp detail. Compound eyes grant the power to monitor multiple horizons simultaneously, albeit with softer clarity. Reflecting on that biological reality, he feels completely justified in pouring resources into his +5 vision mutation. He hoped Gandalf might drop a hint about the effects of such extreme mutations, but the deity seems indifferent. That, to his recent pleas, his fervent prayers have been met with nothing but an eerie, mocking silence. It's as if the mighty Gandalf can only offer a disinterested shrug. Some guidance would be priceless in this alien landscape. The panorama before him is a mirror image of an extraterrestrial world, proof of his rebirth. Anthony's inner explorer stirs, as he meanders through the subterranean meadows with newfound freedom. But he trails every shimmering curiosity with the wide-eyed wonder of a small child. Stumbling upon a peculiar mushroom, he decides to test it with a cautious nibble. He recoils and spits it out instantly. Merely tasting the fungi caused his health bar to flicker and drop. The jagged bite mark he left behind began to weep a foul, corrosive acidic sap. If a simple mushroom snack can inflict such damage, what other lethal surprises are lurking in the shadows? He carves a mental warning to never touch, let alone taste, any unidentified objects in this biome. Now he must distance himself from the pit before the human raiders arrive. Once safe, he'll need to excavate a hidden bunker. He can't help but wonder what other nightmarish denizens call this deep-level home. Anthony cursed his own serenity just by entertaining the thought. From the cavern's roof, avian monstrosities dive, their wings battering the air with sharp, metallic clacks. Their prey are the clawed centipedes lounging below. Those terrors might rule the upper caves, but here they are just snacks. Anthony watches his former nemesis get snatched up like helpless treats by these airborne predators. He ducked beneath the mushroom forest canopy, humbled by his own sudden wave of overconfidence. With honed skills and a concentrated monster core, he imagined himself a king, ready to roam without a care. Reality proved otherwise. If a massive centipede is easy prey, a lone ant is at the very bottom of the food chain. It seems the evolved, nightmare versions of familiar beasts have claimed this territory as their own. It's blatantly unfair. He has no swarming colony to watch his back or offer protection. Had he chosen the adult worker path, he'd be 3M long and 2 feet thick. Regardless, he's committed to his magical destiny. He was well aware the locals would be titans. He accepted that the moment he chose the grueling monster core path. If he leans heavily on his stealth and heightened senses, he might just have a fighting chance at survival. Clinging to his invisibility, he studies the bizarre trees and fungi flourishing in the dense thickets. Much like the flora from his first days, these resilient plants thrive without a single ray of natural sunlight. They sprout strange, fleshy leaves that look deceptively inviting. Until he's certain these aren't cleverly disguised carnivorous traps, he'll keep his distance and avoid any contact. Suddenly, his aimless trekking is cut short by a violent commotion echoing from a distance. This time, he refuses to just cower under a mushroom. He needs to scout the situation and gather intel. Like a predator stalking through tall grass, he drops low and glides silently through the fungal forest. Synchronizing his enhanced vision and sensitive antennae, he homes in on the precise source of the chaos. Keeping advanced stealth active at all times finally pushed him over the edge to a hard-earned level up. Having just achieved this rank, advanced skills now demand significantly more mastery before they can be further refined. Regardless, the timing was flawless. He has just stumbled upon the very prize he was seeking. Stretched out ahead is a croca beast, battered and bleeding. Fortunately, this specimen remains unevolved, and a gaping gash is rapidly sapping its vitality. Staring at the predator from such a short distance, Anthony feels a cold shiver of dread. After all, this was the nightmare that greeted him upon his reincarnation. Back then, it was casually snacking on a living ant comrade. That first impression was a traumatic one. If ants are capable of dreaming, this scaly terror would undoubtedly be the star of every nightmare. But back to the task at hand. This croca has clearly just survived a brutal life-or-death struggle. If he plays his cards right, this is a divine gift. The coast is clear of other predators, and the croca is fading fast. It's time to bury his fear and seize the jackpot of biomass that he was forced to abandon once before. With a surge of courage, Anthony springs forth from his leafy concealment. He swivels his plump posterior mid-flight, carefully calibrating his trajectory. Once he's locked on, he unleashes a torrent of acid, specifically targeting the exposed flesh. It feels ruthless, but a weakness exists to be exploited. The croca bellows in agony as the corrosive liquid floods its wound. The majority of the acid seeps deep inside, melting its internal organs. It is absolutely livid that a measly insect had the audacity to strike its most vulnerable spot. Refusing to let up the pressure, Anthony fires a follow-up blast, dousing the beast's face in liquid fire. He forces the croca to swallow a searing mouthful of acid, dissolving its mouth, tongue, and gullet from the inside out. If these dim-witted brutes keep opening their mouths for him, this could become his signature move. He considers calling it Anthony's mouth shot before the ant winces. He immediately realizes that name carries a very unfortunate and suggestive double meaning. In any case, the croca is now thrashing in a blind frenzy, roaring desperately to escape the chemical fire. Today is officially the worst day of this croca's life. It survived a duel only to be humiliated by a tiny bug. Anthony expected 2 volleys to finish the job, but the beast is sturdier than anticipated. The croca drops low, and begins charging toward him like a demon possessed. This final, desperate lung is terrifyingly fast. Anthony is hopelessly outmatched in a straight foot race. As the croca lunges within reach, it brings a razor-sharp claw crashing down. Anthony barely manages to leap aside. If that strike had connected, it would have been an instant game over for the little ant. Struggling to keep his panic at bay, Anthony commits to a final, do-or-die showdown with his lifelong rival. With his back turned and his abdomen perfectly angled, he lets fly another concentrated acid spray. Fate is cruel. The croca is clever enough to anticipate his one trick and neatly sidesteps the hazard. The beast looks like a brute, but it's deceptively sharp. It relentlessly stalks Anthony, a murderous aura, exuding from its very scales. Every swipe of its claws is a hair's breadth away. A single scratch means certain death. He can't keep flipping a coin on whether to dodge left or right forever. The only path to victory is through the enemy. Instead of fleeing, he pivots and charges headlong at the reptile. A claw comes whistling down, clipping one of his antennae and shearing it off instantly. The shock of a loss is nauseating and white-hot, but he has survived worse. Retreat is a luxury he can no longer afford. It's all or nothing. In a burst of pure, unadulterated desperation, he sinks his mandibles into the croca's left leg with everything he has, hoping to shatter its balance. Tearing into the iron-like scales causes his bite skill to hit level 5, unlocking the crushing bite upgrade for a single skill point. He doesn't hesitate for a heartbeat, mentally slamming the confirm button before the croca can shake him off. He's putting every last hope into one final blow. Unlike the first bite that merely grazed the surface, This one produces a sickening crack as cold reptilian blood begins to spray. Anthony tries to maintain his hold, but a thunderous tail swipe catches him squarely in the side. He is sent hurtling through the air, smashing into a jagged rock with enough force to nearly eject his soul from his shell.